Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we are going to continue our learning journey, joining John Vervaeke as he leads us through his landmark, groundbreaking series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. We are up to episode 23 now, and we're going to get into Romanticism, the era of Romanticism.
The in the moment, here I am. Opposed
Indeed.
to just the I love you so much.
Right?
Yeah.
So what's up, Facebook fam? What's up, YouTube? Sorry to cut you off there. You're in a mid-thought there.
Oh, well, it's funny how we associate the idea of romance to just strictly, the lovey-dovey stuff. But, romance incorporates all of the emotions and expressions. It's just, the draw to in the moment. You could say like a young man's backpacking journey through Europe would be a romantic tale, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe he finds a little quote unquote romance in the meantime. But
there's a recognition in Romanticism that you can get closer to the real through art somehow, rather than rationality alone. That art and music will get you even closer.
Yeah.
And we're looking for something like that because we're cut off from tradition. Where we left off in the series and in human history, the tale that we're following is our story, humanity's story. And last episode we were still reeling from the dark Hegelian, or no, I'm sorry, not Hegelian. What was the previous era called?
It was just in brain. Yeah, it's
just collective forgetfulness.
a Hellenistic.
Hellenistic,
Thank
you.
It was an H word.
Hegel, and then because we know that's coming up, and Hellenistic era, then like the Dark Age, basically.
Well, yeah. So last week we were discussing the relevancy of AI to the meaning crisis and the scientific revolution through Descartes' argument against Hobbes's idea that you could create a material thinker, like a thinker that is made out of the inert matter. And some people would say that Descartes' argument is from, some sort of, Catholic reservation. But I don't think it was that, and neither does Vervaeke. It's more of this, sense of like, well, this soul is something special to humans, and there's something that makes humans special. So you could see, like how that'd be scary to be like, well, if I could make, something out of wood and metal that could think like a human does, then what does that mean? The soul doesn't exist? Does that,
Right.
there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So, Descartes' argument is, So Descartes' reasoning is matter is real, reality is mathematically measured. You have a reasoning. Your reasoning is a process of having a goal, standard of truth, a purpose, a meaning, and through that, a standard of behavior.
Yes.
And rationality, this rational reasoning is not necessarily scientifically measurable.
Right.
Like you can't measure somebody's rationality. You can only measure the products of somebody's rationality. So it's like that's what we do with like statistics when we take people's opinions over thousands of people's or millions of people's or whatever, and then we can look at that statistic with math. But you can't necessarily like the sweetness of something, you can't measure that. The beauty of something, you can't measure that. How comfortable is something? Somebody can tell you this chair is more comfortable than the other, but can you measure that? Because some people think, oh, the floor or a simple stool is more comfortable than that couch. There are things that are not measurable. That is the realm of the mind, if you will, opposed to just the matter of things. So Descartes believed you can't have a material reasoner because there is no reason within matter. Matter just is. It's dead and inert. And science explains things that actually are, but not the value of things. Like worth, like what's something worth? Well, So science is a very valueless system. We talked about how matter was inert, and wondering how can you get reason out of matter. And one example of the matter being, say, different, but the reasoning being the same is like the cat is on the mat. If you said that in French, it would be different matter, if you will, but the same reasoning. So it's not necessarily the words themselves that make the meaning.
Right.
Which kind of reminds me of like early, back to earlier episodes, like, you put, like you replace A's with something that looks like an H, and you write, like cat and all that, but your brain just goes, oh no, it doesn't matter.
It knows
necessarily about the material. It's what it's used. And he was using that example to explain instructional functional organization. It's not necessarily that shape that has the meaning in it. It's the overall everything together. The material in this case informs, but either way,
this is how the brain makes sense of reality. So it can tell what the word is, even though it's an H, and instead of CAT for cat, it's like CHT, but the two vertical lines on the H are tilted enough to look like an A. So the brain puts it together. It knows how to do that.
Same way when we use, like exclamation points to, take the I out of shit, so you can write it in a comment, like everybody knows, they see that. Or those little whatever meme posters that people put, like, if you're reading this, you're part of a small portion or whatever portion of the population that brains do whatever. And it's like, no, like most people can do that, except for the very, very rare people that are so stuck on like, there's not the right letters. That's not even a letter.
Right. I cannot figure out how to share something on Facebook anymore. This just gets harder and harder every week. I wonder what they're up to. Oh, Zuck and crew, you're the bane of my existence. I'm literally just trying to figure out how to share our cast stream from Actuali podcast page on Facebook to my personal page, so people know we're online. And it doesn't like me to do that.
Well, you know how I feel about the Facebook, so don't.
It makes it so difficult. Okay, so here's the live video. Bear with me for just a moment while I do this.
Yeah, that's fine.
You want to continue?
Yeah, I'll continue.
So
we discussed the different qualities of reality. So there's the primary qualities. It's, the measurable, like the measurableness of, say, objects and things, like the density of something, the weight of something, how broad it is, how tall it is, what it's made out of. That's the primary. And then the secondary, in the mind, the subjective qualities. We call that qualia. Matter, let's see, Descartes believed that matter does not possess the qualia, therefore there is no way for matter to manipulate the world such as we do with the mind. So basically saying matter doesn't have a mind, so we can't produce a mind out of it because it doesn't already have it in it. Which, is kind of a weird circular thinking method, but at the time, that does kind of make sense. But let's see more. So then we talked about the gap between logical certainty, which is that can be measured, in psychological certainty, which is the inability to doubt, which is things like bigotry. And they're not directly connected, and that's the problem. You can't measure somebody's inability to doubt themselves. So psychological certainty is probably the less preferable of the two as far as scientific or logical certainty and psychological certainty. But Descartes believed that we could merge the two, so you could be psychologically certain about something, much in the same way that you can within the measurable universe.
Yes.
And if you want to catch up on the notes, I'm just after the first break, if you have those noted.
Yes, I believe that too. Okay, yeah, rationality becoming religiously held.
Yeah,
rationality is not just the logical exposition of ideas, but it's caring about truth on purpose according to values.
Yeah.
So our meaning comes first before. It's very incredibly difficult for humans to be completely 100% rational. In fact, we can't, because even what we choose to put our minds on is going to be based off of some kind of meaning that we apply in our minds prior to our investigation.
And the question of is rationality just came up as well, and that's something we still battle with. Like, is you can rationalize yourself into some pretty unjust circumstances. We've seen it through history, but yeah, and yet again, rationality is not measurable. So this is a conundrum. It's like, how can you be mentally certain about something that's in the realm that cannot be measured by measurable tools?
Because science can only describe how things are, what things are made of, but not how to be. It has no values. We apply the values. And Descartes points this out. He's like, you can't be a material reasoner if matter itself is inert. If we've decided and proven that matter is inert and that it has no purpose or inherent meaning to it, or at least so it seems from our current perspective, then how are you advocating in this way for rationality to be higher than meaning? We are applying the meaning to it all the time. We think we're not, but we actually are. Science is teaching us that matter is purposeless, meaningless. So how can you get meaning out of matter? That's the question.
And Descartes' belief was that you can't, because matter does not possess meaning. And so we've already moved from a world that believed that everything had a purpose. Every bit of matter had a purpose, and some type of
everything
reasoning, quite literally reasoning within itself.
Yes.
But now we've shifted into this idea of the dead universe theory, if you will. Everything's just inert.
Yeah, the universe is not alive and intelligent and aware and co-creative with us anymore, the way that we previously experienced.
This is a very profound shift as far as humans go, because for pretty much all of human existence, even the greats of Greek, the Greek canon, if you will, those stories, they still believed in the world as being this alive thing that they're in, that they're with, that and this idea that there's the physical matter of things, even your body is fleshy physical matter, and then something else that we can't measure. Now that we're basing everything off of measurement instead of participating in the experience, it's like, well, how can I quantify it and measure it and write it down and keep it for later?
And that's our basis for reality, not the depth of experience that we're taking part in, but how well we can measure it. And
Descartes gets to the point where he's really questioning his belief in math, like that whole is there is this a simulation? I've just been programmed to believe that math is right. And
he goes that far with it.
Is it? And so he questions his subjectivity, but the only thing he can't doubt is his existence. He
That's
exists.
The qualities of experience are not mathematically describable, like secondary qualities, like how wonderful is life, how nice is the beach. Qualities like you were saying, that the subjective, those that are in the subject. Objective things where you can measure.
I can tell you how heavy something is.
The information is within the object, so it's objective. That those kinds of things we can verify. So that qualia that you were talking about, that's so central to consciousness and a sense of awareness. It's all secondary subjective qualities. That's this is really. So thus AI may not ever have meaning or awareness, because it can't have the quality of values that awareness can add to it, like the way things mean to us. It needs to be an organic being with survival needs.
Well, that's under the premise of the argument that our awareness and consciousness comes from something outside of just the physical, measurable universe.
That's right. You're right. So then now we get back to this argument or this consideration.
Sure. Well, particularly when we're dealing with, like ChatGPT 4, in my opinion, passed the Turing test by convincing one of those companies that helps the blind people do the "I'm not a robot" test, and they did it for this robot to pass the test. Isn't the Turing test convincing? Well, I guess they would have to know it's a robot.
Say that again in a little bit more detail. How did this thing convince a human being?
Well, so basically, it pretended to be a blind person.
Okay.
And
so it was trying to
pass one of those "I am not a robot" tests.
Trying to open an account, and it got to the "I am not a robot" test, and it of course
and so it emailed a company that does this for people who are like blind that can't see the pictures.
Yeah, because those tests are actually tracking your mouse movement to see how you're going from picture to picture, highlighting the bike or the bus or the train or the tree.
And also AI still has trouble identifying things within a picture. Like they can go with faces and stuff like that, but when you say like,
but the hardest thing for it to emulate is like the natural organic hand movement that you get this.
So they got
print from that.
It got a human to do its work for it.
By saying it was blind.
So we have things.
So it emulated a voice. It got on the phone with somebody.
No, email.
Oh, okay.
Probably. I think it was email.
But it could do a voice too. Nowadays, I mean.
I don't think ChatGPT-4 is hooked up for voice stuff, but I mean, you could take that program and mix it with one of the voice AIs too. And
it's plugged into all different kinds of voice synthesizing.
But so now that we're here on the edge thinking about what like interacting with artificial intelligences that are at least good enough at language that they can kind of convince us that there's something there. So much so that they have to keep reminding us that they're just a language processing program.
So basically, Descartes worried about this withdrawal into the mind that he sees starting to happen. We're becoming increasingly separated from reality.
Yeah, because first it was the mind and the world together as this combined thing.
Yeah, our relation with the world is becoming more and more estranged.
And then it was the mind and the math. Like, you can use your mind to do math and understand the world. And now it's just the mind in itself. And this is similar to, the battle of wills concept that we were introduced to a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
Where now it's not God's reason, it's God's will. Well, now it's the mind's will, the mind within it, the mind in itself, looking at itself and able to describe itself. And matter has no mind. So in a world that's increasingly material, and we're going more into our mind, now we're getting further away from it.
Yeah, like Vervaeke put it as like we're islands of meaning in the midst of a vast, limitless, meaningless universe. At least that's our current orientation to reality. Because we have, through science, seen that, at least apparently to us right now, it seems that, matter isn't moving on its own. It goes according to cause and effect and so on and so forth. Things that we once believed about the heavens are not exactly as we thought now that we've perfected our tools and we've advanced astronomy. We've changed our conception of reality, and we've increasingly become segmented in how we've tried to psychologically orient ourselves as we go along, as we move along, continually learning and understanding more and becoming more and more powerful. But our wisdom is failing us because it is dependent on us having a symbiotic relation with our environment. We need to have a healthy relationship with ourselves, our environment, one another, and we've sadly become increasingly disconnected. Now, so you talked about the logical certainty, the psychological certainty.
Yeah,
the radical bigot, you could say, can't doubt their own bigotry. They're so psychologically certain and that's what psychological certainty is, for instance. Someone that is very stuck in a particular worldview. They see all of those other kinds of people as this blanket term. They're all evil, they're all bad, they're all traitors, or whatever it is.
Or even
for liking that guy, or whatever,
You could also
believe in that thing.
You could look at that in the scientific realm. It's just we're just told that quantum theory and string theory is the right one, even though there's a lot of people that could say no, it's not. But you're not allowed to question that within the science realm. No, that's the thing, and there's a lot of energy and time and money put into that thing, even though it ends up pinching, the theory. Once you get through the math long enough, your equations end up pinching off at either end. That means you don't have a proper understanding. It should just continue going if you have the right math, right?
Right.
But yeah, so like you could have like scientific institution bigotry, which is a big thing. You know, everybody has to fight through that bigotry to get their theory taken seriously.
Right.
You know, like Graham Hancock had to deal with a lot of it. You know, this whole idea that's like, no, humans have only been, you know, in the Americas for however long and all this stuff. And he was just like, no, like humans were probably a lot more sophisticated than we thought. Now we're finding, you know, like
Yeah. 15, 20,000 years ago, we're finding
like footprints in Mexico and stuff. Like, it's like
immaculately,
you know,
carved vases out of hard stone that aren't even pottery that was molded,
Yeah.
but like stuff that's like 1/80th
So,
of an
you
inch
know-
thick, that is perfectly balanced, perfectly made, as though it was machined. We don't even know how they made these vases that are pre-Egyptian, most likely, stored in an early, like first dynastic Egypt, like in some tomb underground. There's thousands of these vases, like they had inherited them from somewhere, because they don't make them in the vases that we find that the Egyptians have in the dynastic era
so
above
old
the
stuff,
ground,
basically
not
old,
stored
old
in the
stuff
tomb.
we can't explain.
Yeah, the old stuff
and-
that they stored in their basements, basically, we can't explain. But the stuff that they had above the ground that they used on their dinner tables all the time and everything was normal pottery that was imitating this old stone style that somebody had somehow figured out how to carve. Like, this isn't even shaped pottery. It's vases that were carved out of really hard stone, and literally the things are like an 80th of an inch thick, perfect circumference on the openings of the vases, and it's incredible that somehow ancient humans did this, and we don't even know how they pulled it off.
Well,
You know, that kind of stuff happens. That's for sure, and that's a sidetrack. But Graham Hancock is cool, man. He
Yeah,
just
but
got me
I
on
guess
that.
the point I was bringing up with him is just an example of
Absolutely,
scientific
institutional bigotry that can occur,
yeah.
closed-mindedness, that basically any kind of certainty that we hold within ourselves, in our minds, is our psychological certainty. And Descartes realizes he can even doubt the math, like you were saying earlier. Like, an evil genius could have programmed this reality and programmed him to not be able to doubt math. And so he realized, oh my gosh, anything that reality itself could be an illusion. Even this is where we really start to get into a head trip as a species. You know, when people start thinking about this stuff, they're like, what the heck is going on in this reality? You know, before we had some kind of spiritual relation with it. Now we're understanding it materially, and we don't know how to relate to it anymore. God, this whole thing could be an illusion, but he can't doubt that he exists.
Yeah.
Now, even if everything is an illusion, I'm still here. I still feel existence. We still feel existence. So there is one thing we can know for certain, but anything else could be illusion. Okay. So to be able to suffer from illusion, I must exist. So we go from, like you were saying, from mind in touch with the world to mind that can only be in touch with the world through something like math to understand it. And then, no, it's how the mind interprets the math, because now we're starting to see how our psychology works. Yeah. So we're further and further and further separated from our sense of oneness with reality that we used to naturally experience.
And matter has no mind. So pay it no mind.
So we've taken...
Be in your head. You can make the universe whatever you want if your will's strong enough, if you have mind enough to do so.
Yeah.
I think that's a very foolish way of going through life, but there is some truth in that. Like, you know,
sure, but we lost a sense of the sacred along the way.
Well, and what are you trying to turn the world into? And there's certain things you can change and things you can't change. And if you spend your time trying to change the things you can't change, then you're going to waste your life. Yeah.
And if there's no sacred, if there's no higher ideals for us to strive for, and if there is no ultimate moral goodness or virtue or anything like that, then anything goes. And who wants to live in the world where anything goes at all times?
Oh, there's a lot of people who say they would like to, but as soon as it shows up, they're going to be the first ones in the bread line demanding being fed.
Oh yeah, and hiding behind the people that are actually trying to protect people from being abused. And
so we discussed weak AI and strong AI. Yeah. So general AI, which is the strong AI. So the weak AI is basically like, you know, your basic computations, spell
it's
check.
Not a great term.
Spell check.
Because this stuff isn't weak at all. It's
sorting out, sorting algorithms, things like that. Things that
anything a computer can do.
Yeah, well, things that make tasks easier for humans. That's
Yeah.
weak AI, but it doesn't advance our scientific understanding.
No.
The strong AI is an
Strong
instance.
AG would be
Yeah,
AGI.
yeah.
Would be an instance of mind, like
Artificial
we have.
general
Yeah,
intelligence.
which we haven't reached
Yeah.
yet.
And so that's, that's an actual instance of mind. And how would you,
Yeah, self-awareness with a sense of qualia, subjective experience, all that.
and how would you know that you've made it? And I guess Vervaeke said, well,
Because it can imitate it before it becomes that, if it ever does become
you would have it explain how Descartes is wrong with
ingenious.
his own argument.
Yeah,
basically
with his own argument. That's so ingenious.
because
Okay. And if it
that
can do
that means it's able to put itself in somebody else's shoes, reason from that perspective, and then find the faults within that perspective. So almost like self-Socratizing as well as
yeah, and this is also
meditatively
a problem that we haven't been able to solve yet.
yeah.
So if it comes up with a genuine answer to it, we'll be able to tell if it's perhaps actually is self-aware. A strong AI, you would say.
And we talked about the mind and the purpose and the inert matter, the forces and energy, and both lack each other's qualities. So the matter doesn't have the mind, but the mind isn't of the measurable matter either.
Right.
So they're always constant. Like it's a dance where the partners never touch, never look at each other.
Yeah.
So like going to a rave.
Yeah, mind and matter are essentially different to Descartes. So how do they interact then, if the mind is immaterial and matter is material? Mind has no energy, it doesn't take up space, it has no force, yet we know it exists.
Yeah.
It's the product of many things happening within our brains, perhaps, but also
But what it does,
could be that it's in relationship with an aware universe that is nothing but a thought in God's mind.
what the mind can do is it can move the body, which can manipulate the cup that can give the water that was depleted by the body. The thought, I am thirsty. The conscious moving of your, and even the unconscious moving, when you're driving and you space out and you're like, where am I? And you've been driving the whole time,
It's crazy that we can do that. Yeah. So Descartes uses the gap between the two, mind and matter, to argue against Hobbes. But unfortunately, this means that we are indeed radically disconnected from ourselves.
And actually, I think it disproves Descartes to a certain degree as well, because this bidirectionality of the mind being able to manipulate the matter, but the inert matter being able to cause you pain, which is a mental process, disproves the fact that the matter and the mind are so disconnected as we once thought. There's still a reaction between the two, but it's not a measurable state, or at least at that period of time. Now we can scan your brain, we can prick your finger, and we can see the lighting up of things. But at this period of time, I'm not sure if they were even at the point of realizing that the brain was the center of reasoning. I'm not too up on my medical history,
now, but yeah,
because there's a long period of time where people assumed mental reasoning was in like your chest or your belly or in the heart. There's argument the brain or the heart for a while. It's the heart, the heart goes, you're done. Brain goes, you're done.
It's an interesting question for this period of time, because this is still like the beginning of the scientific
and we're realizing now
revolution.
your gut is very much a function of how you think as well. So it goes even further.
Yeah.
But at this period of time, there was no real conception of that. They maybe early on they were starting to like open up people's brains and being like, there's something to this custard that's in there.
Oh,
and that it's connected to everything else, but not this is the place that all thought and reasoning comes from.
You're right, because we did think that a lot of our reasoning, our thought, our emotionality, particularly, was in our body, in our heart, or our stomach. The thinking, of course, is happening in the brain, but what about the feeling parts?
Yeah, so the word ineffable is the word Vervaeke used, but the relationship between the mind and the body and what's going on with that is ineffable, immeasurable. Can't talk about it really. Like you can, but you can't really like.
Yeah, he comes to the terrifying consideration that how do I know everyone else isn't mindless automatons either? The only mind I can touch is my own.
Tim Pool talks about this a lot when he mentions the what do you call it? The simulation theory. And he had a guest on. It was just like, he was talking, and it's like, yeah, y'all could just like, not be real and just, simulations for my whatever. And his guest said something. He's like, or we could all just be be NPCs for your simulation. You just don't know. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, that it's such a funny idea that people will play with that and not, are maybe doing so in an atheistic point of view too. Sometimes it's weird because you're just getting into a weird Russian doll situation. Something had to create the initial universe that the beings that created this universe exist in. Right. How did that begin? You can't just say the universe is a simulation to solve for the Big Bang, or multiverse theory. You're still stuck in that Russian doll, like a continual regress situation.
So to continue on, just so we can get through, because we're running up on 30 minutes.
So we're
the Descartes had some points. One, the math is real, and two, the consciousness is the touchstone of reality.
Yeah,
it's a seesawing between the two.
Yes, I like that. That's a good way to put that. Yeah, and we've been careening, swinging back and forth.
Yeah, and
science says what's real and not real, but what if it's all an illusion or a dream? We don't know which basis for reality to agree on now. One of scientific materialism, one of
and we all
divine
just insult each other and do ad hominem attacks.
So we're down to ad hominem attacks now to prove our points because we don't even agree on a basis for reality.
So the romantics came in with the idea is what is real is my own personal experience, and to give Descartes his due with the thought of the only thing I can't really disprove is my own existence.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of that. Okay, well, if that's the case, and the only thing you can't disprove is your own existence, then the only thing that's really real, what is most real, is my own personal experience in this world.
Yeah.
Which,
that's where it landed. Right. And so all we have now at this point is an isolated, contentless, no autobiographical, moment, a limitless, meaningless emptiness.
That's inherently unstable as well.
Yeah.
Because it could all just be a dream. How do you know your experience is real?
Tortured, fragmentary, conflictory worldview nowadays, and this has been like this ever since this time. It's just slowly gotten worse, you could say.
So we've lost perspective, we've lost tradition, and a bunch of other things that were necessary, and somehow we still think we have contact with our mind.
Mm-hmm.
And but Dewey, what is that I? I think, therefore I am. What is that thing? Are you so sure about that I?
Yeah, is it introspection? Is it memory?
Yeah.
Because there's no mathematical way for us to measure past experience. So how do we describe our relation with reality now? How do we understand our place in time and space now?
And it's now. The only contact you have reality is the moment now, because the past already happened and the future is yet to come.
There's an idea of what's to come. Yeah.
So it's the body stuck in empty space of this now, surrounded by nothing, which is terrifying.
Mm-hmm. That's why people don't want to meditate, because you are inviting yourself into the now.
Yeah, and so we're introduced to Pascal, which was a real smart guy.
Yes, he had a transcendent experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he recognized something was missing, that a spirit of finesse was missing.
Yes,
we had lost our procedural, perspectival, and participatory modes. We were just down to proclamations of what we believe. At this point, we are no longer experiencing life through participation, just according to proclamations.
And this idea of being in the right space at the right time.
And proclamations are flimsy. They're not heavy things to hold on to. They're not sturdy.
And so that spirit of finesse is within the idea of self-transcendence. So we've lost that.
Yes.
Which makes, a lot of sense. That stuckness we feel. We feel like we can't go up. We're just constantly being crushed.
Yeah. There's nothing to turn self-transcendence into wisdom anymore. We used to have wisdom schools for people that helped them have altered states of consciousness, self-transcendent experiences where you transcend the psychological sense of self. You feel the communion, the oneness with all of reality, whatever that phenomenon is, that people across the planet, regardless of culture or time, period have all experienced and talked about this ineffable oneness that we can all experience. Yeah. They're all running into this. So without a way to turn that into wisdom, actionable wisdom anymore, to live our lives according to the realizations of self-transcendence, we are lost.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to get into...
I've got one last quote from my notes, and this is John Vervaeke quoting, I think, somebody else, which I didn't write down because I'm a loser. The loss of the spirit of finesse has left us bereft of the transformative truth. Or of transformative truth, not the transformative truth, but transformative truth.
The process of experiential knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and when you think finesse, what do you think? Somebody who can gracefully do something, or like in modern times, you got finessed is when somebody can, like trick you into something, usually out of money. But, like this idea that you can do something with such grace and so smoothly and very adeptly, and
you are in deep accord with reality in a very accurate way. Yeah,
like somebody who does the perfect dive with the corkscrews and the other stuff, and then just makes one tiny little drip of water come out of the top of it. That's finesse.
Yes,
good cutting skills.
How can we bring that back into our personal lives and our interactions
with an upward trajectory?
And our social methods of organization and science and schooling and so forth. How can we bring finesse back to life? Name of the game.
So we're going to talk about the romantics and this idea of your own personal experience being the definer of reality and truth, and particularly within the moment. Moment that, and a lot of the drama that comes from romantic tales is because you're in the moment, and then your repercussions happen in a later moment. But you're so in the moment while you're doing it. That's Romeo and Juliet is a romance, not because they're madly in love with each other. That's just a premise to explain the story of how the families are having interactions and the warnings of becoming too passionate. And it's like, oh, she wasn't wasn't actually dead, or no, he wasn't actually dead, or however it was. But then you killed yourself anyway, and then you had to do it all over again because tragic, you weren't thinking about it, and the families weren't thinking about their war with each other and all that stuff. But and then there was the art during the Romance period. The art became very beautiful and very accurate. Like as far as you see like what's that that painting where God's in the brain with all of his little cherubims hanging off of him. And he's really forcing out to make contact.
Michelangelo, what is that called?
The touching. Except the thing is the guy's not reaching out. The guy's just kind of like, I don't know.
Well, God's like shaped like a brain too.
Yeah, his cloak is very much shaped like a brain. But like if you look at that, they're very accurate. They're trying to tell things. And if you look at like what on the Sistine Chapel, and you look up there,
it's a deep message.
It's not like what art used to be, because like if you look at like sculptures from like Egyptian sculptures and Persian sculptures, they're very, and even Greek sculptures, they're very idealized body types, and the kings and everything, they were very stiff, and they didn't look very real. And then there's just this explosion of realism, and now you're seeing things carved out of marble that look like flesh, and and parables and stories told within a single painting. I don't know exactly time-wise when all this matches up, but this is all about that same area where everybody starts thinking, and like we're going to go into a renaissance of thought and being, and
we go into an age of enlightenment here for a little bit, and it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful answer to the dark period that we had just come
probably one of the better things we could have done from that period.
That is what I really, really hope that we can do today.
I think
because it's the stakes are so much higher right now.
I think it's coming. I'm seeing like how people are creating systems for themselves opposed to relying on old redundant calcified systems. You can take look
There's
at
a lot
media,
of people
art,
out there
music, like
that
all
are lighting
stuff.
candles.
And now with the internet, these people who are creating their own spaces are also tech savvy and are creating new niches within like the internet itself, which is still really new, but now it's evolving again. And
there's a lot of people seeing past the infighting, the sides, the gangs. That everyone's got to choose a side and be a part of this or that.
I frankly think most people are tired of it, and then a good chunk of the most people that are tired of it are finally getting to the point where they're just like actually talking about it and be like, nah, I'm not participating.
Not just going along.
I'm going to do my thing and hang out with people who want to do their thing, and we're going to do that. Screw all that.
Because going along with the group is normally safe, and sometimes the group that you're used to identifying with is reliable enough that you'll just kind of go along. But when you start finding out your group is going along with some really, really dark,
well, and even your
evil
own
machinations, then you
even your own misconceptions of the world as it was that informed your thinking and how you viewed the world. Because like
God, yeah.
And then when you, I hate to say,
gotta be
but
wary of
wake
our
up and you
uncertainty.
start to see things, and you have that moment where you break, and you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But then you move through, and hopefully, if you can move through enough, then you go through your own personal golden age, if you will, of reasoning and understanding.
And hopefully that can continue on through life.
Because humans as a species are psychologically and spiritually evolving, but then the human goes through the same process that we see that we've done as a species over hundreds of thousands of years.
Yep.
So, like I equate the times right now as we're like, teenagers moving into into young adulthood as a species. We've got all the abilities to do things to our access, but we don't have the wisdom to do it properly. So we're screwing things up like you do as an older teenager or a young adult. When you go out and you live in not the squat house, but the house with a bunch of other, 20 other people in there, and everything's all messed up, and your relationships are messed up, your jobs are messed up, like everything's messed up. We're at that point, we're growing, and like teenagers, young adults as a species right now, we're very self-destructive. Everything's about resistance, and
we're
this
very
this
capable.
is me and my group, and that's you and your group.
Got a
My
lot of
group's better than
vitality,
your group,
a lot of energy. We're very capable, but we can be destructive.
As a young adult, then you go through the period of time where you're like, man, go to the festival and you see like, how can everybody love each other and be so open and awesome? So we're going to end up probably going through that where there's actually loving and open and awesome. But then at the end of that, you're going to realize, well, that works in certain circumstances, but life is real. So I think out of this, we're going to see probably a pretty beautiful boon.
Yeah.
And I won't be alive to see the end of it. I don't think any of us will. But then afterwards, we're going to have to go through tougher times again to show that it's like, okay, in certain aspects of life, yes, we can have this loving, very connected relationship, but the world is still harsh. The life is still harsh, and we still have to
all the more
be
reason.
tempered and resilient, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and push forward towards the best as best we can. And if it doesn't happen, don't be broken. So don't, I forget who it says, but building anti-fragile systems.
Oh yeah.
You do that
Daniel
within
Schmachtenberger.
Daniel Schmachtenberger. You do that within yourself too. You build yourself into an anti-fragile system.
Yeah.
So
that's it.
When
That's
things
it,
happen to you, you don't just break down and turn into mush.
He talked about that on one episode of the Stoa that was really, really helpful for me. And I highly recommend the Stoa on YouTube for all of you all. If you enjoy this content, you would enjoy that content as well. And definitely check out Daniel Schmachtenberger. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Schmachtenberger or Schmachtenberger. But it's a crazy last name.
I'm from East Coast, West Virginia. It's Schmachtenberger for me. But I'm sure if you're from the Midwest, it's Schmachtenberger because, the odds are
but if you just search Daniel, SCH, MACHT, something like that.
It'd probably be easier to type in the
just
Stoa.
put a bunch of consonants in together, and you'll get them to pop up. Daniel the Stoa would probably work.
Yeah.
Daniel works with Tristan Harris at the Center for Humane Technology that I believe they founded together, or they at least work on together, and the Consilience Project as well. He's doing some amazing work in the world. Yeah, there's a lot of people out here doing this work right now, and they're not on anyone's side besides Team Humanity, Team Earth.
Team Earth and
there's people left and right of center, all different dispositions. Some believe in God, some don't at all, and they're all working together, trying to make the world a better place and figure out how we can get past our tribalism and
basically reducing suffering as much as you can.
Yeah.
In a world that is prone to dukkha.
And putting many minds together so we can collectively make sense of reality, because we have to ratchet up our wisdom.
Yeah, well,
our common sense.
And even beyond ratchet up, we need to reclaim this idea of wisdom and being able to go somewhere and be with people whose intent, like the intent of the place and the intent of the people, is to garner wisdom. And spread wisdom and share wisdom. It's like the days of, everybody going, if you really want to do it, you go to a monastery. there are people who still, like, we have monasteries around here in Podunk, West Virginia area. We have that, but for most people, they're not going to go off to a monastery. But if there's a place that they can go every day and have these conversations, I'd like a pub. Like, if I had the money and the business wherewithal all to do this, I'd like a pub that has you can talk religion and politics rule, but if you get out of control and emotional, you're going to be kicked out. And if you keep doing it, we're going to ban you, because you do have to, keep, if you can't drink and keep your temper in control, then you can't do it here. But I'd love to see a pub where it's like, no, you go and do what we used to do. You get around, you talk, sit there over a few beers. And I don't mean like getting riley and getting loud. I mean like literally trying to fight people because they said they don't like your president, or
or it might just have to be coffee and tea and not alcohol,
maybe make it a private club base where it's, like you can come in the first few times and then you do
to the private section where you can drink if you're invited.
We have perhaps a few private clubs around here.
And you can get kicked out,
where it's basically, you get in there and you pay $5 a month dues to be able to go into a place where you don't have to worry about, I don't know, like some college jock kid that wants to punch you in the head because you're chatting up his girlfriend about, philosophy. But the idea of reclaiming where we would go and hang out, and the pub, it was the public house. That's where you discuss this stuff. And even if you weren't drinking, you were getting food, you're hanging out, doing your tea, doing the after work thing, getting around with people. And if you're not a drinker, then other places have coffee shops that you're allowed to do this at, on the street, places on the street. But now there are no places that I am allowed to talk about stuff like this or the touchy subjects without getting the stink eye. It's like, you shouldn't be talking about that stuff.
We need a place to talk about these things and practice philosophy and wisdom as well. And that's where it gets tricky, is like bringing in the deeper aspects of the practices. But even just as a collective place that people can come and make sense together, and utilize our intelligence to figure things out together, that would be highly important. And then the centers where people can also practice wisdom together would be conjoined with, though. They need to be conjoined together the way they used to be. We lost that. Universities and spiritual centers used to be conjoined in a practice. But in this episode is going to be interesting for people. This is a challenging one. Even for me, it's a challenging one for anyone that watches it, I suspect, because of the challenge that he raises in this episode. The potential of us figuring out how to live deeper spiritual, or you could say religious lives, without the trap of tribal religious grouping that we typically fall into when we practice religion the way that we have previously. So what's the next version of spirituality for human being is what we're going to actually start touching on here a little bit.
Yeah. And it'd be cool, to kind of introduce something that you could consider secular spirituality and wisdom making that isn't just crystals and incense, but that is like, actually it's like, okay, well, you don't have to believe in a god or a Christian god or any of this. We're going to just talk about techniques on, do what basically is being done, like how Vervaeke's doing it. We do spend time talking about Christianity, but in the West, Christianity was the dominant, not just religion, but also, sometimes governing force, and all the great thinkers were Christians of some way or another.
Yeah, as agreed upon moral system. Yeah. And in that way, since we all were basically taking part in it, was
adjusting, making a new or adjusting old agreed upon moral systems and
coming up with something new that
doesn't require you to,
that has the weight,
buy what's the term,
buy into dogma,
or the proposal or proclamation without having to just take a proclamation. It's like, no, like I'm not here for the proclamation.
It's deeper than just proclaiming a belief. Yeah.
Actually, I'd like to see churches do that more too.
It's cool that you said that. You raised a good point there. And I was watching a video. I shared it today on my Earth's Awakening news page on Facebook, if you guys want to check that out. But it was Russell Brand speaking with Cornel West. And Russell was asking Cornel, is like, how do we talk about this side of things? They started getting into the sacred together and the subject of spirituality, spiritual life. He's like, what is there that we can, how can we talk about this in in a way that isn't new agey, that isn't airy fairy, that actually has some strength and weight to it.
Yeah.
You know, how can we imbue
That's actually graceful.
spirituality
has the power.
with something that, with something deep and reliable and confirmable, and that everyone can kind of rally around? Because right now it's kind of diffuse and spread out as we've begun to re-explore spirituality, and we're pretty much anything goes. We're taking a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You know, I'm studying Stoicism, Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, yoga. Like, everyone's done this. A lot of people, in fact, have done this nowadays, as we've tried to kind of reform a spiritual life in the modern age. And, you know, where does this end up? Does it continue to become more diffuse, or do we find a way to start finding what actually is reliable and works very well for the largest number of people, and the individual?
Well, I think part of that process is the diffusion. It
is the diffusion's a part of it. Yeah.
You know,
what we're going through right now is natural. It's what you would have to go through. Yeah. So now we understand why New Ageism got the way it is, and everything else is happening.
And I think that was necessary too. You know, all the super, like, almost cringe now hippie stuff when you look back and you're like,
some
oh my god,
cringe,
but that was
it's great. But yeah, it's just
but
diffuse.
it was important at the time, and it played a part. So everything that happened in the past had to happen for you to be here right now, as you are having the thoughts you had. So
to be at this point in history,
if it happened any different, it wouldn't be this. So, you know,
we had to learn these lessons. Indeed. So this has been awesome. Just getting to chat with you guys for a little bit. We are going to jump in now. Before we do, I want to thank you all. Guys, we hit 100,000 plays on the podcast this week. I think it was yesterday at some point, and I missed it. I saw that it was about to come, though. And, you know, I looked today, and it was like 100,000, 200 something. And I'm like, my gosh. Okay. It took 4 or 5 years to get here, but the past couple of years have been rocking and just growing and growing. And I wouldn't be here doing this right now without all of you. And so I'm thanking you guys right now. I'm very grateful. We got people in like literally over 50 countries across the planet, mostly in the U.S. and Canada and Great Britain, but we really are all over, and that's really exciting. It means a lot, and it also tells me that you all are as hungry for meaning as I've been. And finding a way back home together is the goal of this cast. So I'm so grateful and humbled that you all have joined us. And this gentleman here, one of my great friends.
Who you calling gentle?
I'm glad. He can be, though. Look at him. He's fluffy.
Yeah, that's an illusion.
He got a little bit of padding. But it's just been an amazing gift. So thank you guys. Look forward to our next milestone. We're going to go for 250. Then we're going to hit 500. And then we're going to hit 1 million, and we're going to continue growing. So for those of you that are just joining us on YouTube, that only know us through YouTube, we have a podcast side of things. You can listen to the meaning making series that we're doing now, and many other episodes, guided meditations, Wim Hof breathing. There's a lot of stuff there, as well as interviews and conversations with other people. But I encourage you guys to check out those episodes. There's something in there for everybody, and to look for more coming up as we go, and to subscribe here on YouTube, because we're just really starting to put some energy into the YouTube side of things now. DJ's come along and helped the podcast a great deal. Like, we would not have this nice setup here if it wasn't for DJ. And actually, we got to give a shout out to
TV Dave.
To TV Dave for letting us share the space over here where we were putting on this cast.
And a very nice soundboard.
And a very nice soundboard as well. Yeah, we're not just running through.
It's meant for live sound, but it does a great job.
Yeah. So with the power of the Tascam, with the UR22 Steinberg audio interface and the mixing board there, and some cheap software and a computer that's still chugging along, we're somehow doing this thing.
Hey, at least we got Sennheiser mics. We're fancy.
Yeah, we got have decent mics. We're going to be upgrading these things eventually, but the more of you guys that actually subscribe and like, the more money I can afford to put into the cast. Like, we are literally a couple of starving artists. We're in a band. Don't expect us to have a lot of money and to be putting on Lex Friedman, level quality podcasts yet. But I do believe that we have the capacity.
Other than his cameras being a lot better than ours and him having blackout cloth, I think we're doing pretty good.
I think we're doing all right. Yeah. I think we're doing all right. And so, thank you guys. And
100,000. Yeah.
Thank you all. And that's it. Yeah, let's jump in now. This is episode 23 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis on the subject of Romanticism. Let's go.
All right.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we took a look at three pivotal figures. Two of them are in dialogue with the central figure that we were talking about last time, and that's René Descartes. And we took a look at the debate between Descartes and Hobbes and how that is so current and relevant to us today in the debate around the possible creation of strong AI and what that means both scientifically and existentially to us. And we then took a look at what comes out of Descartes' response to Hobbes. If you remember, Descartes builds a defense against Hobbes' proposal for a completely materialistic artificial intelligence, computer model of the mind in terms that are drawn very strictly and I think rigorously from the central insights of the scientific revolution, and that seems to save the human soul from the Hobbesian onslaught. But we then note we pay a really, really devastating price for the Cartesian defense. We have a radical disconnection between mind and body, which is radical because of how embodied your experience of yourself and your world is. A radical disconnection between mind and other minds, because you only have access to other minds through bodies, and if there is no possible connection between mind and body, there's no way you can read other people's mental states off of their bodily behavior. And then we have the radical disconnection between mind and reality, because Descartes gives us two competing models of how we get in touch with what's real. One is we track the mathematical, and then that is, of course, was picked up by positivism and people who advocate for science as our main access to reality. And then the other is that cogito ergo sum, that all that's left of the contact with reality is the moment where the mind touches itself, and we get this purely subjective notion of realness that's picked up by the Romantic tradition and is also prevalent in our world today, and we swing between the positivistic and the Romantic notions of how we decide what's real in a completely unstable fashion. We then noted that even your connection to yourself has been undermined because the Cartesian project is so radical in its withdrawal, it's so radical in its disconnection from mind, body, world, tradition, history, culture, that all the I is, that's in the cogito, all that is guaranteed to exist is this moment of self-awareness. So you end up with this completely atomic, completely autobiographically empty self adrift in the terrifying infinite spaces that Pascal talked about. And we talked about Pascal's response to Descartes and how Pascal was convinced that Descartes' attempts, and Pascal was right about this, Descartes' attempts to try and deal with the anxiety of the scientific revolution by promoting a methodology of searching for certainty would ultimately come to ruin. And of course, they have come to ruin, as we've said. Instead, what Pascal pointed out is that we have lost all these other ways of knowing that were so central to the axial revolution. All we have left is the spirit of geometry. We have lost the spirit of finesse. We have lost the procedural knowing, the perspectival knowing, and the participatory knowing that are so integral to the transformative experiences that have been central to our discussion of the axial ages legacy. And of course, Pascal himself had such a transformative experience and found the Cartesian framework incapable of addressing or articulating it. I'd like to now pick up on what comes after Descartes, because I foreshadowed at the end of our last episode that we are in a quite significant situation. We are radically disconnected from ourselves, both our own bodies and our own minds, from other people, from the world, from history, from culture, from sapiential institutions, from traditions of transformation. We are radically isolated and bereft, and yet we face these tremendous crises: ecological crisis, socioeconomic crisis, political crisis, mental health crisis. They're all interlocking, and we face it, and they're so exigent and so pervasive and so profound and so complex that we need a fundamental transformation in consciousness, cognition, character, community, in order to really restructure our sense of who and what we are and our relationship to the world in order to address these crises. Now, the systematic set of psychotechnologies that have brought about such radical transformations in the past have been religions. And yet, part of the heritage of Descartes and the scientific revolution and the ongoing fragmentation that has followed from the Protestant Reformation is an increasing secularization of the world. That's a little too simplistic. I mean, it's bifurcated. You get the increasing secularization on one hand, and then the increasing attempt to nostalgically retreat to a pre-scientific model in various forms of fundamentalism, which of course is doomed ultimately to a complete kind of failure. But this is happening such that for many of us, a return to religion in order to provide the multi-level, multivariate, complex transformation that is needed to meet the crises that we're facing is not available to us precisely because we are post-religious or we are myopically entrenched within a pre-scientific model of the revolution, scientific revolution, that will in no way avail us with what we need in order to address these crises. So either way you want to turn, the religious option is not a viable one. What I want to now explore is why a secular solution for many people also no longer seems viable. So what I want to argue is that we face this hard problem of needing a religion that is no religion, but cannot be fully secular, but we don't want it to be religious. And it is filled with all this paradoxical tension and contradiction that I've tried to argue is the hallmark of the Cartesian legacy. The way I want to argue that is to try and show the responses to the meaning crisis that come after Descartes. And I'm going to talk about them in terms of the pseudo-religious ideologies and how we have been traumatized by our interest and bewitchment by these ideologies, precisely because these ideologies have led to titanic warfare and genocidal bloodshed. And so we're trapped between, we can't return to religion and we can't move to its political secular alternatives because of the trauma that has been inflicted by their history. And so we are stuck, right? There is no political solution, to quote the police, and yet we also are not willing to return to a nostalgic and therefore impotent religious framework. So we sit trapped. So how did that arise? So again, we have to move rapidly. And I mean, I don't want to trespass on your time. This video series is already long, but we're moving through titanic figures here, and it always is, I feel, a difficult thing to do. But I want to talk about the figure of Kant, and we'll talk about Kant in a couple places, so I need to introduce him here anyways. So Kant is trying to deal with this fracturing in realness that Descartes has left, right? And the two sides, the inner subjective mind touching itself and the outer mathematical. And Kant brings up a question that is very important, and there's been other people who have given voice to this, and this is an important one, which is, how is it that math is so good at describing reality? Why just accept Galileo's claim that it's the language of the universe? We no longer see. At one point, we had an answer to why math is so descriptive of reality. We had the Neoplatonic answer, the idea that reality is ultimately grounded in intelligible form, and those intelligible forms, you remember the IDOS, the structural functional organizations, are ultimately abstract, eternal, etc., and that's the ultimate grounding. That's why many people who are realists in mathematics formally and explicitly label themselves as Platonists, because that is a way of trying to explain how mathematics gives you access to reality when it is nothing like spatio-temporal material reality. I mean, why is it that something like math describes physics so well? And what Kant was really trying to get at is, how do I get those two sides of Descartes together? How do I get the side that says math is real, but all I have, math gives me access to reality, but all I really have is access to my own mind? How do I get those together? And Kant comes up with a really radical proposal. He calls it a Copernican revolution. He thinks it's as important as Copernicus' revolution of the external world. And the Kantian proposal is a very interesting one, because what I think it does is it really radicalizes things even more. So Kant's proposal is, these categories, these patterns of intelligibility we find in the world, the mathematical properties, aren't actually there. Not in the sense we think they are. So what Kant does is he basically makes use of a move that Occam made. If you remember, Occam's razor, and remember I often say people don't understand what they're invoking when they invoke Occam's razor. Occam's razor basically says that all these patterns of intelligibility you think are in the world are actually in your mind. Right? What Kant does is says, well, these ways of measuring the world mathematically, they aren't the features of the world, they are the way in which experience has to be organized in order to make sense to the mind. So let me try and give you an analogy for understanding that, right? So I'm going to do a reverse on the analogy you see me use when we were talking about Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, right? So let's do it the other way around. The world is very blurry. There's too much. And so what I have to do is I have to filter it. I have to filter it so that it will fit my eye, and my brain and I can make sense of it. So these filters have to be put into place. And so Kant's idea was, there are structures in the mind that basically act as these filtering frames. It's kind of both a combination of a filter and a frame. And what they do is they impose a structure of intelligibility on experience. So this is opposite to the Platonic. This is why it's a Copernican revolution. It's a complete reversal of the Platonic model. So the idea is, I'm not discovering the patterns of intelligibility that structurally, functionally organize the world. What's actually happening is this, right? This pattern is being imposed on the information coming in so that it will fit my mind and make sense to my mind. And that's the basis of my capacity for reasoning about the world. I can reason about the world not because the world is ultimately rationally structured, but like Occam said, the world is absurd in itself. I can reason about the world because I have filtered it in such a way that my mind can process it according to its own internal grammar. So see how this is why it's a Copernican reversal. I'm not discovering in the world the mathematical properties of things. My mind is filtering and imposing a structure on them so that it can make sense and think about them. So you have to take this word and this phrase and make it really, really strong. Your mind is making sense of things. And it's going when we talk about relevance, we're going to see that there's a deep way in which Kant is, I think, right. And you say, okay, so yeah, I see how he's sort of completely inverting the world from Plato. I get that. Right? So math isn't discovering reality. Math is ultimately about how the mind imposes a structure on reality so it can reason about it. Great. All right? What does that mean? Well, notice we've got now the mind. Remember we talked about this model of the contact with the world being withdrawn, and it's being withdrawn inside the mind by Luther, and then it's being withdrawn really by Descartes. Now, not only is it withdrawn, it's imprisoned. The mind is in here, and all that can get in here always has to pass through this filtering frame. And for Kant, that means we can never know the world as it is in itself. As he famously said, the thing in itself. We can never know the world as it is. This is why, of course, the Cartesian search for certainty is going to be completely undermined. Right? So ultimately, notice how this is all coming together. The mind is ultimately only really touching itself. It has no contact now with the world. It's not only withdrawn from the world, it's isolated and trapped within itself. But it does answer the question, well, why does math work so well? Well, math works so well, according to Kant, because that's the grammar of how our minds operate. That's why math, which seems such a mental and abstract and weird thing, seems to make the world, seems to give us access to the structure of the world. It's not really giving us structure to the access of the world. It's creating a structure in the world of experience that makes sense to human beings.
Okay, we're back.
Okay, well, we'll do this quick then. Fundamentalism rejects science. The return back into this religious state isn't going to work, or being overly secularistic is not going to work, and pseudo-religious ideologies aren't going to work.
Yeah, and we've tried this. The world is increasingly bifurcated, and we're trying to be either overly materialistic and scientific to try and understand and get a grasp of reality, or we're being too literalistic with our religion and fundamentalist. So a return to the traditional way that we perform religion is not going to work. And this is what Kant is, or Vervaeke is now recognizing, is that we get tribalistic with our religions. We separate and we break off and we get into ideological certainty. And in fact, we know this because in the last couple hundred years, last 2 centuries, we formed a bunch of pseudo-religious ideologies and tried them out. And we have immense trauma from that experience because of the mass genocide that occurred as the result of socialism and Marxism and fascism. And so these pseudo-religious ideologies do not help us either. Yeah. So what do? In this situation? We need a fundamental transformation of the way that we relate with reality. Yep. We're in a crisis of many interlocking, pervasive, complex challenges.
And so we're introduced to Kant, and he's trying to deal with the fracturing of realness that Descartes left us with between mind and matter. Yeah. And
we're reminded of stinging, there is no political solution.
So why accept math as the language of the universe?
Yeah.
Which used to be the case, but in the sense of eidos.
Yeah, everything had a sacred, ultimate, underlying form in the Neoplatonic worldview. So this was how math actually did give us access to reality in a way that didn't disconnect us from it, or our sense of interconnection with the world and co-creation with it. So Kant's proposing his Copernican revolution now, and it's a flip of Plato and Neoplatonism. He's saying that these patterns of intelligibility are not actually there. You know, what we're measuring in the world are not measurements of reality. It's just how our mind makes intelligible what it can filter. We're measuring the way our mind patterns things to make them intelligible.
Yeah, and we're introduced to the term filtering frames, which is an imposed structure that our mind imposes onto the world.
To make it sensical to our minds.
Yeah, and so it's not math is the language of the universe. Math is the language of the mind in which we come to grasp with what the universe is.
Yeah. The math is not out there in the universe. It's a way our mind patterns and makes sense.
So
we can never actually know reality then.
Yeah.
The mind is only ever touching itself. And so even though we've become increasingly accurate in our capacity to interact with the material world, we find ourselves feeling increasingly disconnected from relationship with reality. It feels increasingly meaningless. It's void of meaning and reason. And we feel increasingly unstable, without a home. And this is, of course, the seeds for nihilism. So now the mind feels imprisoned, basically.
And
math only works because it's the grammar of how our minds work.
That's why the math works well. That's why we're seeing like, oh, we can break everything down into math. It's like, well, the underlying of everything is we'll never be able to experience that. All we can experience is the own filtering structures that our brain has and the way our brain communicates with itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had a big old long spiel before then, but we were on the wrong screen. But that basically sums it up. It's actually pretty good. We should pretend every break's like that because we went through the notes.
Because I feel like, oh man, how are we gonna, how are we gonna be able to do what we just did? We had so many good points and everything, and I think we actually just flew through it.
Yep.
We didn't get quite as wordy, and we didn't go on as many long tangents. I think we had maybe a couple good tangents there, but hey, it's lost into the mist, and you guys got the gist. So, I'm gonna rhyme my way out of that one. I can't believe I did that. Yeah, I left it on the screen. I left it on Vervaeke after I paused it and meant to move it back to our screen here. This is why, if there's anybody out there that lives close by, a friend or a family member, anyone out there that would be interested in helping us run the show, you can actually become a part of the show too if you're interested in this subject matter, or you can sit in the background and you can just press the buttons. It'd be very helpful to have somebody in the background helping us, because there'll be less live mistakes like I tend to make.
We'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah, we're learning as we go. I've been an audio podcast guy for a while, and now we're trying to do this video thing. And yeah, speaking of guys, thank you again for helping us get so many listens on the podcast, and let's grow the YouTube side of things now. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple or wherever you like to listen, get on to YouTube and find Actuali Podcast. Like and subscribe. We would love to have you here with us. We do these Wednesday live streams every Wednesday, every week at 8 p.m. EST. All right, so now we are going to officially jump back in, and yeah, that's it. Let's go.
Right? That's a really big price to pay. The price you pay for getting the two sides of Descartes back together is to get them both inside the mind and to be radically, radically out of touch with the world now. So you can imagine that people are upset with this. This is a very challenging idea. There's going to be some really important responses to this. There's going to be the Romantics and Hegel, but I want to concentrate on the Romantic solution because I've already mentioned it, and we'll talk a little bit about Hegel when we talk about Marx. So there's an idea here, right, that's sort of implicit in Kant. Right? There's an idea of information coming in from the world, right? So the problem with this diagram is it's too simplistic. So think of the filter as having sort of levels of processing, right? There's the raw information from the thing in itself, and it's getting processed. It's coming in, right? And then there's all of this structure being imposed on it. Now this, by the way, is the most prevalent model in most of cognitive psychology and cognitive science. Where you see this Kantian grammar of trying to understand the mind is in current contrast between bottom-up processing versus top-down. So the idea of bottom-up processing, we talked about this when we talked about attention, right, this is processing that starts in perception and moves towards cognition. Top-down is processing that starts in cognition, starts from your knowledge, and moves down into perception. Remember, we talked about this when we talked about how you do this, right? The cat, right? You see this as an H and this as an A. And how do you do that? Well, you use the knowledge of the word to disambiguate the letters, and you use the knowledge of the letters to construct the word, and the two are completely interpenetrating in a completely self-organizing manner outside of your cognitive awareness. It actually makes your reading possible for you. It's a condition on the possibility of you reading. And so, right, this is the same model here. The mind is imposing a structure, and it's filtering and framing and structuring the information coming in from the world. So this Kantian model is pervasive through all of cognitive science. And for good reason. It turns out to be a very, very powerful way of looking at things. But as I move this way, as I move into the mind, right, as I get inside the framework, my cognition, of course, becomes more and more rational, becomes more and more mathematically, logically intelligible. But think about it. Notice you've got this weird idea now. As my processing becomes more rational, more logically mathematical, I'm actually getting farther and farther away from being in contact with the world. Now, isn't that a... See, notice the Platonic aversion, the Platonic, right, reversion, like a complete reversal of the Platonic structure, is bringing with it a reverse consequence. So for Plato, as you pursue rationality, you move deeper and deeper into reality. But for Kant, right, notice as I move more and more into rationality, I'm moving away from being in contact with reality. Now, what comes to mind is, well, isn't the opposite then the case? And think about how this is going to make Freud and Jung possible. I mean, you know how you get Carl Jung? Take Kant. If you don't know Kant, stop talking about Jung. Because Jung repeatedly tells his readers, I'm a neo-Kantian. I'm through and through a Kantian. He tells you that repeatedly. And so if you don't know Kant, shut up about Jung, because you're not understanding Jung properly. The way you get Jung is you take Kant and you take Kant's epistemology and you add it to Gnostic mythology, and that's how you get, that's the equation for Jung. So why do I say this? Well, think about this. Because if I go the other way, if I open the mind up to these more irrational, less fully processed parts of cognition, the boundary between the conscious and the unconscious aspects of my experience, as I move into the imaginary, irrational, dreamlike aspects of my cognition, I'm going to lose rationality. But notice what I'm gaining. I'm gaining back that lost contact with the world. Lachman talks about this in a really good book called The Lost Knowledge of the Imagination, right? And so I think this is a misunderstanding. But notice what's going on here. And this is why my attitude towards the Romantics is so ambivalent. They're picking up on Pascal. They're trying to recapture the lost perspectival, participatory, right, knowledge, the actual involved contact with reality. But because they're inside this Kantian framework, the way that's going to happen is by moving into, right, the depths of the irrational aspects of the mind, because those are the parts of the mind that are closer to reality. And so, of course, what Jung and Freud are going to do is they're going to take that, what the Romantics do about how to reach out into the world, and they're going to make it, well, at least for Freud, it's completely reaching down into the psyche. For Jung, it's reaching down into the psyche and back out into the world. We'll come back to that later. So this is the main idea of Romanticism. Romanticism ultimately isn't about loving your sexual partner in a particular way. It's the idea that we can recapture contact with reality by moving away from the rational layers of cognition and into the irrational layers. Why does that get associated with love? Because, remember, in the Neoplatonic tradition, with the Romantics in this twisted way are trying to get back to, they're trying to get back to gnosis and participatory knowing. In that Platonic tradition, The quintessential form of participatory perspectival knowing is love. The Romantics they get that. They're remembering that. So we move into the irrational and we'll regain contact. And of course, that relationship to the world where we're actually in touch with the other and there's mutual disclosure between myself and the other, that's love. And so the romantic return to reality through irrationality gets connected with love, and that's how we get romantic love, and we get the idea of it as a fundamentally irrational force, right? And you get romanticism. And then you get the idea that, well, what is the faculty that stands between perception and reason? What's between? Here's perception here, the part where the thing in itself, the world, and here's reason up here. What's the faculty in between the mathematically intelligible and the sensuously experienced, right? Well, it's imagination. Imagination is where the mind initially imposes that order on the raw data of experience. See, for us, and the Romantics were very critical of this, and this is something that they were right about, we understand the imagination just as moving mental images around in our head. And the Romantics made a big distinction between imagination and that faculty, which they called fancy, right? Or like phantasm, right? No, for them, imagination, right, is how the mind imposes structure on raw data so that it becomes available to reason. And so the imagination is the place in which we can get closer outside of reason to the access to reality. So music and art are going to be understood as giving us access through the imagination to what's real. Why? Because music and art are where the mind seems to be imposing an order in such a way that meaning is made that we can then rationally reflect upon. So you're getting two views now, right, that are coming into opposition. One, the older view, represented by the Enlightenment, I mean that in the scientific sense, not the Buddhist Enlightenment, people like John Locke. The mind is an empty canvas, and sense experience comes in and writes on it. Right? That's empiricism. So the mind is a blank slate. The Romantics have exactly the opposite view. We don't actually ever know what the world is in and of itself. The world is an empty canvas on which imagination presses itself out. This is why expression is so important to the Romantics. To press out. The mind, in imagination, presses itself onto the world. And of course, that's where Jung and Freud are going to get the notion of projecting onto the world from. So you have these two, and that's why the Romantics see themselves in deep competition with the empiricists, who, of course, are part of what becomes known as the scientific model. So what's going on here is these two views. The mind is a blank slate upon which the world impresses itself. Locke uses the term impressions. The world impresses itself on your mind. Or the Romantics. No, the world is a blank canvas upon which the mind expresses itself. And both are wrong. I mean, I very rarely just sort of state things. But I'm really confident of this. Both of these models, the mind of a blank slate, is just overwhelmingly wrong. Way too much argument and evidence against it. And this model of the world as a blank slate that we merely express ourselves onto is also wrong. But what we get is we get this weird new thing. Everybody is swept up in Romanticism. See, Romanticism becomes a pan-European movement. It's a movement of the arts. It's a movement in literature. Goethe writes The Sorrows of Young Werther. You have people like Beethoven bringing in, right, a romantic element to music, right? You have lots of romantic poetry. think of Blake, think of Wordsworth. So you have this movement. It gets taken up into religion by Schleiermacher as a way of trying to understand religion. It's a pan-European movement, right? And it does, it's hard to be fair to this, but at least it appears to do what religion used to do. It integrates music and art and literature and the project of trying to find and make meaning in the scientific worldview by giving you this whole framework of how you regain contact with reality. One of the hallmarks of the religious quest. You're going to regain contact with reality by moving into the world of the imagination, making use of art and music and poetry and literature, all of the machinery, we'll talk about this later, of religion. And what it's going to do is irrationally take you into contact with reality. So Romanticism is the first, and it is the godfather, godmother of all the pseudo-religious ideologies. Okay? It looks like, behaves like, and performs a kind of massive transformation on culture and cognition and consciousness. And people start experimenting with altered states of consciousness precisely because of all of this way of thinking. This is why Freud is going to take a look at hypnosis, etc., altered states of consciousness. It's people are taking various drugs, right? Coolidge and others. There's all of this experimentation precisely because of this way of looking at things. But what it does, right? You're paying a really devastating price for this pseudo-religious ideology of Romanticism, right? And if you think that Romanticism is not alive in our culture, you're not paying attention to the fact that we still understand and use the grammar of Romanticism to talk about love. And we even buy into, at least for periods of time, a romantic model of how love operates. Romantic comedies are these weird metaphysical perversions in which we throw away the scientific model of things and believe that somehow love is this irrational force that brings us in contact with the course of history, at least our own personal history and destiny, and that of another person. And it's all so much bullshit, right? And it's devastatingly bad bullshit because you are still trapped where Luther and Descartes left you. You're still trapped inside your mind, not really in touch with things. And the only way you get in touch with them is by thinking and behaving irrationally. You are trying to make this machinery of the imagination carry all of the Neoplatonic weight that religion and tradition and philosophy and history carried. You try to make your romantic partner take the role of all of that. No person can bear that. No human relationship can bear that burden. So we go into our romantic relationships with unreachable expectations of how the person is going to address everything that we've lost in our history, and of course they can't. Which of course is why many people simultaneously say that their romantic relationships are the things where they find or look for the most meaning in their life, and the romantic relationships are those things that have precisely caused them the most trauma and suffering in their life. So these pseudo-religious ideologies are really, really important because they point to an attempt to try and get into words, try to get into words, to propositions, into ideological ways of thinking, everything that religions used to do for us. Because the problem with the Romantics, right? See, the Romantics get this in one way, right? They get that the language can't do it all, And that's why they turn to poetry, right? To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, to see infinity in the palm of your hand and spend eternity in an hour. There's Blake trying to use imagery to point to a transformative experience, a mystical experience. But you see, the problem is, if you don't have any sapiential traditions, if you don't have the spiritual exercises that Hadot talks about, if you don't have the systematic set of psychotechnologies, if you do not have regular and reliable methods and guides for these transformative experiences, all you have in the end are the words. And if you're not Blake, if you're not Coleridge, when you read the poem, you don't, I mean, even if you can appreciate how great a poem it is, you're not capable of getting much from it because everything has been reduced to the words. See, the Romantics didn't give us anything else. They don't give us practices. They don't give us institutions. They don't give us systematic sets of psychotechnologies. They give us promises, they give us images, and they give us words. It's a pseudo-religious ideology. So it sweeps the continent.
Okay, we're back. Moving along. Getting intense, isn't it?
Yep. So, brought up levels of processing. There's the top-down look into the levels of processing, and that's reverting into the mind, further into the rational, which, paradoxically speaking, actually takes you further away from the world. And then there's the bottom-up coming out of the mind, the irrational, which seems to bring you closer to the world, at least in this idea.
And neither of these work. It seems we've tried both of these.
Yeah,
and neither of them work.
He mentioned Kant plus Gnosticism is Jung. So when we get to Jung, let's remember that.
Yeah. So with Plato, with the Neoplatonic idea of reality and how the mind relates with it, and how math is actually represented in the underlying substratum of reality, like there's these primordial versions of every object, like there's the ultimate triangle, there's the ultimate tree from which the shape for all trees in reality are born. These, these transcendent objects, Neoplatonic objects, that puts us into deeper relation with reality when we see it this way, when we have this kind of existential mode. With Kant, we're moving out of relationship with reality. So yeah, like you were saying, Jung or Jung, depending on how you pronounce it, is a neo-Kantian. He takes Kant's epistemology and then this Gnostic approach to reality and brings them together, and recognizes that as we move into a more dreamlike, imaginatory state, you get less rational or maybe pre-rational, but you get more in contact with reality. And we're trying to pick that back up and have that deep relation with reality that we used to, but we're falling into irrationality as a result, aren't we? With Romanticism, the idea that we can contact reality and have this relation with it through the imaginal, through the pre-rational mode.
Yeah, which imagination is the faculty between perception and reason, at least from the Romantics' point of view.
Yeah.
And imagine is an imposed order on basically raw existence or raw data to become, and to hopefully to bring us into better contact with reality. And we're doing it in ways like music and art, because music and art is quite literally the mind imposing through imagination order onto the world. Quite literally, you're ordering it. You have different techniques, like say if you're an artist, you have, different mediums, different techniques in which you work in, different symbology that you use to get messages across. In music, you're literally using sound to change a perspective, to, tell a story.
Yeah, so in this sense, and when Kant talks about imagination, he's talking about not as in fancy or fantasy, but how the mind orders the raw sensory input of the data that comes into our minds to make it accessible for reason.
Yeah, it's not that
the
fanciful sense of imagination, like, I'm imagining myself, I don't know, like as kids play and stuff like that, but more, like actual ordering the raw data of the universe.
Yeah, it's like say you have a goal and you start thinking about how you're going to fulfill that goal. That's
Yeah.
using imagination as the way that they saw imagination, not just the fantasy side of it.
Yeah.
So now romanticists are basically looking to music and art as a way to get closer to what's real. To recognize how meaning is made so we can reflect upon it. So now we're looking at these ways of getting in there. So you have the empiricists during the Enlightenment.
Well, before we get to that, so there's two views on this. That the mind is an empty canvas.
Yes.
That basically that is written on by the world. Or the second is the world is an empty canvas that then the mind expresses itself within.
Yes.
And Vervaeke's argument is that both of them are wrong.
Yes, that's exactly what I was getting at. Yeah, the empiricists, the mind is a blank state upon which the world impresses. The romanticists saw the world as an empty canvas upon which our imagination is impressing itself. And wow, what a switch there. So, both and Vervaeke does say that he disagrees with both these guys. And he also points out he doesn't like to make certain statements like this. This is one of the times that he's going to, though, because he feels pretty strongly about this one, you could say.
Yeah. Well, quite obviously, the world isn't just this blank slate. It was here before we had minds to think about changing it.
And we know through genetics also, through evolution, the environment does affect us.
Yeah. And also the argument that the mind is just a blank slate as well. That's not entirely true either. We're very impressionable, but the mind still does its own thing.
Yes, yes. And it does have some dispositions that can be there from the time of birth that are handed down.
Sure.
Yeah, psychological dispositions.
If you don't develop the mind properly, then yes, it can be damaged. But also, well, if you don't exist within the world properly either, you could be damaged, or the world can be damaged as well.
And Romanticism just explodes across Europe at this point in history because it does seem to fulfill a lot of the things that people went to religion before. So it becomes this pan-European movement. It's integrated music, art, literature, philosophy. It's given us a framework to gain contact with reality. So it has all of the machinery of religion, and it has what we think is going to get us where we need to be. But now we're starting to see how Romanticism was actually like the godfather of all the pseudo-religious ideologies that came after,
and
that we are now suffering from.
There's a price to pay. There's a price to pay for getting yourself into these ideologies. First off, you're exposed to a bunch of bullshit.
Yep.
And that's the actual term, not just saying.
That's the technical term.
Technical term.
Yeah, that we can bullshit ourselves as opposed to lie to ourselves.
These ideologies don't untrap you from this filtering box that you have around that is always between your mind and the world experience happening. It doesn't untrap you. It gives you nothing to get yourself out of that.
Yeah, it seals us even tighter into that prison.
And it doesn't give you the strength that it doesn't get you the strength to get out of this conundrum that we're in the first place, between the separation of the mind and the body or the universe.
Yeah.
And then we end up putting that stuckness onto our partners.
Yes.
Our romantic partners, and this idea that you should be completely fulfilled, and your problems should be handled by your partner, and all these
if you find the right
intellectual,
partner,
spiritual,
then you have your meaning in life.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and that's too much to put on any other person.
That is.
It's almost too much to put on yourself.
That's why the ideal of it is an interdependent relationship rather than a codependent relationship where you're looking for your happiness in your mate and your fulfillment in your mate. If you already have your happiness and you find your meaning within, then you are independently healthy. Then you can be in an interdependent relationship where you're not dependent on each other. You're actually upgrading each other, you could say.
Well,
you're both independent, but you're choosing to be together because you're even better together than you are apart, kind of thing. But you're not getting your happiness from the other person. You're independently happy. You're with them because you celebrate who they are and you love them that much that you want to have life with them.
Yeah. So ideology is propositional, much like the Protestant view of religion. There's this proposition. The proposition is you're nothing, and if you're lucky enough, then you'll get the grace of God.
Yep, we're back in the propositional mode here again, and so we're trying to make Romanticism carry all the weight of what religion, tradition, in our relationships, in our cultures, societies gave us before. These are unreasonable expectations to put on romantic ideals alone. But of course, strongly held ideals certainly do become ideologies. So we have these pseudo-religious. They're not truly religious, but they're cultish in their ways. That are trying to put into words and proclamations all the things that religion used to do for us before. And so using poetry, imagery.
And since they don't have the wisdom and the the transformative processes and the sapiential community around you, all they're left with is the words. And since they're trying to talk about something that can't be directly talked about, they'll give you flowery poems.
Yeah, and the flowery poems are good because they can point to the transcendent, but what we're lacking nowadays is a way to actually take that recognition and turn it into actionable wisdom.
If you're not initiated into this process of upward thought and transformation, and then the words are just words and they just sound cool, and unless
they might give you a little bit of hope in that moment. They might give you a little bit of help and a little bit of insight, but they're not going to help you actually tune yourself to reality consistently in a deeper way like the old wisdom schools did. Yeah. That's for sure. Like, of course, because we love music. It gives us these transcendent feelings. It's incredible how powerful music and poetry and art are. They certainly are life-fulfilling. They instill us with wisdom and insight, but it's not deeply interwoven in our lives and our culture in a way that we're living spiritual relation in a spiritual relation with reality already, and then we're enjoying this poetry while being in spiritual relation. It's actually the poetry and the music is trying to remind us of our spiritual relation. So it's a disconnect that's happened, and we're trying to get back there through the arts, and we're not quite doing it.
Understandable though, because like if you take somebody to like an art museum and you look at some type of Enlightenment era painting or something like that, your average person is be like, well, it's pretty, that's a nice view of the market and people going around and all that. But like somebody who is initiated into the thought, like the techniques, the schooling, the school of thought, if you will, that these artists are participating in, then they can break it down. And it's like, well, you notice like how this person's hand is placed in this other person and this relationship happening in this corner here. They can explain what the story is within it, just like a good poem. That one poem.
Just imagine if we were all like a part of the tradition of knowing that, and then we're interacting with art and music, and we were informed on how these different artistic things come to be.
And I guess the bane of the Romantic period is more about the words, kind of like the split between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. The Orthodox Church was more about the process and moving through the participation, whereas what ended up being the Catholic Church was more about the words and the
proclamations
and the set canon of this is what this means, and this is the story, and this is what this word means.
And since they were competing with scientific materialism that was very exacting and precise, they started to become literalist in their interpretation of the scripture rather than recognizing these deep metaphors as allegories for how to live. And of course, we still kind of know that. We do know that subconsciously, but we're really much more hung up on the proclamations than on how to live. We're really not trying to live this religious life 7 days a week, 24/7. Very few people are really trying to do that. They're do it on Sundays, maybe if they go to church on Sundays and when they remember, but it's not as deeply interwoven a part of our life.
Well, I guess the art. Can you quote like
art's expression of the sacred ideals?
There's a difference between being able to quote scripture and you have the words fine, and then being able to see the underlying message of what that story was trying to tell.
Yes,
like that's the difference. You've got the words, which you can memorize the words and everything, and I've talked scripture with people who are way better at quoting scripture than me. I'm more of a gist guy. I get the gestalt and like how it all works. But it's interesting because I find there are people that are really good at quoting the scripture, but what they're getting out of it is like, well, this happens, so don't do that, or else this is I don't know, the whoever's gonna come kicking down your door and whatever. And it's more like, no, actually the lesson was deeper than that. Like the whole, Mary was going to be stoned to death because she was pregnant and she wasn't married to her husband. The lesson isn't don't have sex out of wedlock because you're going to get stoned to death. It's like, we used to do this, and isn't it a good thing that somebody stood up and was like, let's not cast these stones, because, well, then if they would have cast the stones, they would have killed the savior of mankind, if you will. So, it's reading the words for the word's sake, opposed to trying to read into what was trying to be said, either by the individual or by the practice,
and to live
itself.
according to it. And the fact that we don't have the wisdom schools to help us learn how to imbue our lives with this way of being anymore. We can only celebrate the art that points to the sacred when we see it, but it's not good for keeping us in relationship with the sacred. You do need some kind of wisdom tradition for that, with fellowship and feedback and guidance.
Yeah, and I would say it's like, here's a good example.
Because it's hard to be good. We are fallible beings.
There's that art that we all like, that has sacred geometry in it and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh, it's so spiritual. But you ask the person, and this isn't all of them, but
No, some of them are very deeply spiritually profound.
But then there's some. It's just like, well, I use these shapes because this is the seed of life, and I'm trying to get that point across. But it's like, that's as deep as it goes.
That's about as deep as it goes.
So there's this calling to want to understand it, but just using the shapes and using the words and using the things isn't enough.
Yeah, no, it's not just because it points to something real and that there's something there, but we're not really committing to living up to the thing that we intimate is there.
Yeah, so that's
it's kind of off in the distance, and you don't have to totally stay true to it because you're not sure about it. That's kind of the place the human's in right now with God, and we're holding ourselves back from living our birthright, perhaps, and becoming active agents of an awakening cosmos.
Well, nowadays you can be spiritual all you want, but don't you talk about God.
Yeah. This keeps bringing me back. It's crazy because the synchronicity between the subject matter in this episode and the conversation between Russell Brand that I was telling you about earlier, telling you guys about earlier with, what's his name? I just lost train of thought. Black gentleman.
Looks like a better looking Don King with that hair.
Yes,
with the huge hair.
Yes. Cornel West.
Cornel West.
It came back to me before I even saw it. Yeah, Cornell. They were talking about this very subject, about how to be able to learn to live as a prophet in the world rather than just proselytize. And so it's that's what we're doing right now. We're proclaiming, but we have to become the prophets that we seek ourselves. The change that we seek in this world has to come from within.
Well, there's no point in just yelling. You're all sinners and you're all going to go to hell. It's like, well, what is sin and what is hell?
And then
because
othering one another into groups.
It's like,
and the chosen,
can you just tell me what your words mean and what exactly they are and why I wouldn't want to be? And maybe
these are the people that we should, repel and shun.
Yeah, right.
This certainty is so dangerous. This kind of ideological certainty where we get into these group mob minds, and we're not reflecting, and we're not trying to understand the other side anymore. We just have blanket generalizing terms for them now.
Well, and even blanket generalizing terms for ourselves too, and for concepts. Like the quote unquote woke lexicon is the same words we use, but they have the meaning we think, but then there's also another meaning, but then there's also some other meaning that's tied to it, and it is just used to confuse. And yes, you just say the words, and you don't really have to know about the meaning as long as you just say the words.
Yeah, the rewriting of
as
language.
As long as you do the work.
Incredibly Orwellian.
Yeah, it's
the way it's going down. And if you have a good memory of 1984 by George Orwell,
fantastic book. And actually, the what was it? 2 movies. I guess the most recent one that they did, the non-black and white one, was actually freaking fantastic.
It's really, really well done.
Very, very, very well done. It is worth watching. It's worth reading the books, but I think that one is pretty true to the spirit of the book.
And the feeling of it so well. Yeah.
And when he has the elation of having that affair with that the one woman who's like basically like Hitler Youth or whatever equivalent, is like adherent to the thing viciously, but then him and her get into a relationship, and it's beautiful while they're in it, but then it falls apart and they fall right back down into it, and then it's back into the despair and the horribleness. It's like, whoa. You get to break out for a moment.
That there's this guy that he looks up to that's like this revolutionary that kind of takes him in, and then like he trusts him and he gets to know the guy, and then next thing you know, the guy's an agent of Big Brother the whole time. God.
Or remember the scene where it's like they're sitting at the lunch table and one of his coworkers comes down and it's like, I don't know what's in this meat, but it's double plus good, eh? Or double
plus good.
Yeah.
Or they're excited that the price of chocolate rations has gone down, even though it's gone down from $12 last week to $14 this week, kind of thing. They're constantly lying to themselves. And his job is actually like literally rewriting history. Like he's constantly editing newspaper headlines and articles and changing them to reflect the current narrative. So much of that, that the othering that happens in that story, the how they use language in that story.
That's one
thing. That you're always monitored and watched, and that you have to proclaim your virtue through the group that you identify with, rather than inner virtue.
And well,
thought crime.
1984 and how people read it is a really good example of this. Are you reading it for the words or for the meaning and wisdom underneath of it? Because I know a lot of people
for something to
that
live
have
to.
read 1984 that are literally becoming ingsoc,
and
they'll still quote it.
Music and movies and art just for mere sensory entertainment, or are you going to it for meaning in such a way that you can engage with life more deeply and more meaningfully?
And not just a meaning to suit your own goals either, but like
but
coming into it open
communally
and
individual. Something that empowers both the individual and society at once.
A good story should break you at least once within it, where you just go, whoa, I was
Shawshank Redemption style.
Really not just get you in the feels, but get you in your mind thinking, like, questioning your own beliefs, your own ideas, trying to, or go like, what really was being said here, and why did I have such a visceral response to this? Why is this hitting me so deeply? Not just
shows, movies, music that you feel like you grew from after experiencing. That's the good stuff.
If I want to make you feel happy, warm feelings, I'll show you pictures of kittens and puppies. And if I want to make you feel bad feelings, I'll show you pictures of puppies and kittens that are sick and injured. It's not hard to get you in your feels.
No,
it's hard. It's hard to do it properly, to get people in their thinks and to think, and then to think about themselves thinking, and then try to garner wisdom out
that's
of it.
Even harder. Yeah.
Well, probably the first part of
and art's a great
gaining
tool
wisdom
for that.
now is challenging our own preconceptions. I think that's going to be the cornerstone of modern day wisdom.
The urge of the artist is take this into life. And the consumer is just kind of taking it to consume for entertainment. And we've got to get out of that just consuming for mere sensory gratification, for mere sensory pleasure.
Well, and also just producing to be provocative, because
it's like filling this. We're trying to fill a void, and it doesn't fill it, and just doing it to be provocative too,
What's
just to
that
get
saying?
attention. It's again, it's ego. It's the separatist.
What was that quote from a movie? It's like, but what does it mean? It's not supposed to mean. It's provocative. It's not supposed to mean anything. It's just to provoke a response.
Yeah, right.
Which
well, then you have a meaning inside your mind about trying to provoke a response for some reason.
Yeah, well, I think it's like crapping on a canvas, smearing it around, and calling it art. Yeah, okay, you did something somebody else didn't do before, but what do you mean by it? Are you talking about like the innate nature of man to think so highly of themselves and get all snooty on things that they'll buy literally a piece of crap on a sheet and be like, oh, I'll pay so much money for it.
They'll smear something on top of a blank sheet.
Now, there are artists that actually do that, and that's the point, and that's pretty deep. But then there's the imitators that are just like, I'm just going to do what the other person did, Like I'm going to take a picture of a can of fruit.
That's what most artists end up being, sadly, nowadays, is imitators and emulating what other people have done.
Well, actually, art throughout time has always been this battle between the
always
creatives and the imitators.
It's how far away from that. And there's something beautiful in the emulation side of it, too, because people are continually upgrading the art form of everything that they're emulating initially. And we're all emulating one another, but there's something very special that humans can do where you can swing way out sometimes into imaginatory realms and find something quite novel that hasn't quite happened that way before, and it's a new thing that people start emulating after.
Well, look at like J.R.R. Tolkien or Stephen King. They were some of the most profound
D&D
story
Dungeons
writers,
and Dragons,
but
just
really
because of
they
Tolkien.
were just using the hero's journey architecture
and
for writing a good story.
Fables, old tales.
But mimicry is the most sincere form of flattery. So we should, like, if somebody's like copying what you do, you should be so like angry about it, unless they're really trying to like rip you off and like do that. But if they're copying what you do, like your style or like your sound or whatever, no, that's flattering.
But they're doing it in a unique way
Yeah, it's
in their
like,
own
yeah,
way too.
oh,
That's
that's
awesome.
cool.
That's cool.
Well, it's like seeing, little kids when they start acting like their parents or somebody they look up to, or when they watch a movie and they want to be Superman. It's flattering to be mimicked. And actually what we do with God,
and inspired by,
all these horrible things like creating AI and cloning and other stuff we're capable of. It's messed up, but it is a form of flattery because we're trying to mimic God imperfectly as we are, but still.
I like the idea that God finds himself through our realization as well.
Yeah.
Like he loves it and he can worship in reverse. We can worship him. He can also worship us when we come into our fullness.
Yeah.
That's an interesting notion. And I don't, not in a way that the human should be egotistical over it or grow their head over it, but in a way that they're in a true reciprocal realization with the ineffable, with the divine source.
For the experience,
because it's the divine source relating with itself all the time.
Yeah, and
it's not us.
The thankfulness.
What we think we are.
The thankfulness of being able to have this experience where we do get to, at least in my opinion, express and continue the infinity that is God.
Mm-hmm.
In the most basic terms, you could see us as expressions of God, if you will.
Yeah.
We, to think that we have.
I like to think of it that way.
We're our own movers to a certain extent, but that being your own mover is also an expression of God. Every pain, pleasure, and everything that you feel, every thought that you've ever had, the evil and the good are all just expressions of God. And we're lucky enough to be able to do this and be aware of it and not just be like a tree just there or like an animal just existing and being.
And what you're speaking of here, like family and friends, like this is something that humans, like we said earlier in the cast and many times before on this podcast, every human being has access to that experiential knowing and that communion with source. And it can be proven to you unequivocally that there is something much more.
And I think
it's absolutely beautiful and loving.
Where Martin Luther was
beyond our knowing.
I think where Martin Luther was right was you don't necessarily need an intermediary between you and God to have this experience. It can help, but you don't need
he was right on
somebody else.
But the fact that we started doing it on our own without the wisdom of those that had spent many years dealing with the traps, and with the wisdom of our experienced guides, you could say teachers or sages or whatever. We certainly are like boats without a paddle in an immense ocean.
The sage isn't in between you and God. The sage is
a facilitator.
Facilitator, precisely so you can realize your connection, not somebody standing in the way that you have to go.
But what the church did when it created its secret police and it started to literally like arrest people that disagreed with it, that's where that separation started to happen. And when priests started to act that way, more authoritarian, and rather than as facilitators so much, but more as like the doorway that you had to speak to this thing, and then it would speak to God for you. That probably was a mistake.
And that we're talking about the Catholic Church at this time, but even before
sorry, Catholics,
but
it's not a personal attack by any means. This is just looking at what humans have done.
Pre-Christianity, there was this thing: you'd go to the temple, you'd pay your money, the people there would be your intermediaries. Maybe you talk to an oracle that is between you and God to garner understanding about whatever your question is. So this idea of having an intermediary between us and God is not exclusive to the Catholic Church. It was, for certain periods of time in certain places, like the norm. Well, if you want to go talk to the gods, you go to the temples, you pay your whatever, and you go do it there, opposed to it being, if you want to talk to God, you just get on your knees and you talk to God.
Yeah, and prior, was just, we had a relationship, and we had our medicine men and our shamans, predating all the religions.
So, so it's actually a pretty new concept.
This is a hard one for people to stomach. They don't want to hear that. We have trouble hearing that our mystical wisdom traditions, our religions, all actually are rooted in ancient shamanism. Every single one of them, from Christianity to Buddhism, Hinduism, across the board.
The idea of going into a cave with great acoustics and having an experience like you do at Catholic churches, I'll give them that.
Having a religious experience.
Yeah, the religious experience. That's from old school, like shamanism, where you'd go in the cave and...
Because we were hunters and gatherers and eating the fruits of this planet for a long time. And we ate the psychedelic ones. And they gave us incredible spiritual experiences. So powerful and so unnerving sometimes that we had to learn how to breathe just to get through them to the other side, to where you break open and experience this golden zone of deep epiphany and insight and understanding, and the brain makes all these new pathways, and you gain this new relation and sense of oneness and communion with reality. That thing, I'm losing my train of thought now. I'm gone.
Might be time to go
I
back.
think it's time to go back to Mr. John Vervaeke, associate professor out of University of Toronto, award-winning lecturer in Buddhism, psychology, and cognitive science, and his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis lectures, number 23 on Romanticism. We're jumping back in, fam. Make sure to like and subscribe, and drop Vervaeke some likes and subscribes too. And let's go.
Give us systematic sets of psychotechnologies. They give us promises, they give us images, and they give us words. It's a pseudo-religious ideology. So it sweeps the continent, but it's like spiritual junk food. It's tasty, but it's not nutritious. And so what happens to it, right? Well, it quickly gets translated into nastier forms. Not without, first of all, of course, setting the world on fire. Romanticism plays a big role in the rise of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Don't forget, Romanticism, Beethoven is writing music initially because he's a fan of Napoleon. And when Napoleon crowns himself emperor, that's when Beethoven actually abandons him. This is the time we're talking about. Why? Why would the Romantics be attracted to Napoleon? You see, we have to be careful here. There's some very good podcasts you can listen to comparing Napoleon to Hitler. Right? That's your reaction as soon as I mention the word Hitler. That's fine. But, right, why? Like, of course, Napoleon didn't engage in genocide, but he drenches Europe in blood. He launches imperial conquests. There's lots of good historians that say, maybe we only like Napoleon because more time has passed. But why do they like him? Look what Napoleon is doing. By force of will, and that's what the imagination is, he is pressing a structure on the world. He is restructuring the world. He is painting his picture onto the world. Here is the isolated self pressing itself out on the world, imagining the world into another shape and existence. So, of course, Napoleon is defeated. And science continues to move on. And what happens is, right, there's a response to the failure of Romanticism. It ultimately fails. Now here's the thing that we have to understand. Romanticism, and I've tried to indicate this to you, Romanticism fails. It fails to actually do what it sets out to do. It fails to be the replacement for Christianity. And in that, but it doesn't go away. So the way I put those two together, the fact that it fails, which I've tried to show you, but it doesn't go away, which I've tried to show you, in the notion that we live with decadent romanticism. We live in decadent romanticism. And romantic comedies are the quintessential form of pornography in which we indulge in decadent romanticism. So, what happens after the failure of this great pseudo-religious ideology? Well, there are further attempts to try and understand these romantic, the irrational aspects of the psyche and its world-making capacity, and the way, and we're still carrying this, remember, from Occam and Aquinas, the priority of the will. The priority of the will. So here, Romanticism very quickly passes into Schopenhauer, who is the godfather of nihilism. And notice that a lot of these names are now going to be German. Goethe, one of the founding figures of Romanticism, is German, even though he comes to reject it later. Schopenhauer's German, Nietzsche's German, Hegel's German, Marx is German. Again, everything keeps happening in Germany. And I've shown you why, because that's where this history is unfolding. What does Schopenhauer argue? Right? Well, he completely internalizes that model of the world that we saw around the time of Occam and even in Luther. He picks up on Kant, but he says, right, let's use an up-down model. Here's the rational part, remember, and it's out of touch with reality. And like the Romantics, here's the irrational part, right? And the Romantics saw this as imagination, and they saw it sort of spontaneously happening, but it's still an act of will because they talk about expression, pressing out, right? But Schopenhauer really zeroes in on this. And he says, no, what's down here is arbitrary will. Notice that it's like God. It's like that God that we get after Occam. Here's arbitrary will. This is the will to live. The raw, let's just put it the will to live. The raw will, this is what drives you, this is what structures, this is what filters and frame. It's all of your experience. This will to live. Of course, this is going to be important to a lot of modern discourse. It's relentless. And it's pointless. Because it is not rational. And here's where Schopenhauer does a twist. It's doing this, but not fundamentally in service of your rational mind. It makes reasoning possible. But all of this, right? So Kant does the Copernican revolution. He inverts Protestantism, and then Schopenhauer inverts Kant. Kant was it that this is processing is for the sake of this. But what Schopenhauer says is, no, this is actually who's in charge. He says the will is like a huge man and the ego is sitting on his shoulders, right? This is a little machine in the service of this. And if you don't think that's Carl Jung, you better go back and read some more Jung. That's what I mean. If you don't get this Kantian heritage, you're not reading Jung very well, right? So, Schopenhauer, let's use one of Schopenhauer's quotes because it really, really brings this out, and you can see how it prefigures Freud in such a powerful way. Schopenhauer says that sex is the cruel joke that the species plays on the individual. Because what sex is this will to live, this irrational will to live, and it filters and frames all of your experience, and it promises you meaning and fulfillment and everything that God and religion and history, and then you have it, and none of that accrues to you. And he says, and then what's the difference between you who do that for 40 years and a mayfly that does it for one day? So we're restlessly driven by these look at how, again, everything's being drawn into the mind and now drawn into the unconscious, irrational parts. So this is where that arbitrary God has now withdrawn. In that Lutheran, Cartesian, now Kantian, now Schopenhauer way, it's inside of you. And we're just all machines. And you get Richard Dawkins, right? We're all just replicator machines for our selfish genes. It's not a radical idea, right? We think we're doing all of this for us, but it's actually all of, and so for Schopenhauer it's this nihilism, it's this pessimism. because he saw that once you remove the connection between meaning making and rationality, you pay a very, very devastating price for it. And so what do you have there? Well, what do you have? You have a meaningless existence, because it's being shaped and framed not in contact with reality, not even contact with your rational, egocentric way of, it's just an irrational, unconscious, arbitrary will to live that is shaping, filtering, and framing all of your experience with the world. And then you die. And what was it all for? Schopenhauer has enough of the romantics left in him that he has this idea that in art and music we can become disinterested enough in our own self, we can quiet the will to live enough that we can get momentary breaks, momentary vacation, momentary respite from this restless, pointless will to live. So this is the godfather, this is how Romanticism as a pseudo-religious ideology and nihilism as an existential response become inextricably linked together, even though most people don't realize it. Most people don't realize that these two things, Romanticism and nihilism, are actually deeply intertwined and closely related to each other. So think about that when Valentine's Day rolls around. Are you actually expressing, right, the contact with reality, or are you merely being pushed around by the irrational will to live? So, Schopenhauer, of course, has a great follower, right? A person who is now very prominent, because if he's the godfather, right, of nihilism, Nietzsche is the godfather of postmodernism. So Nietzsche is a disciple of Schopenhauer. He's actually a disciple of both Schopenhauer and Wagner. And Wagner represents Romanticism in music breaking down. So Wagner takes Romanticism and he sort of breaks the last vestiges of grammar. He breaks the connection to the home key, all kinds of things. He opens up the possibility for music becoming untethered from its tradition in very powerful ways. And of course, the problem with Wagner is he's also a very vicious anti-Semite. And you might say, what's going on? Like, what's this going on with Germany and this anti-Semitism thing? Well, first of all, we've seen how Gnosticism, which is running as an undercurrent, as I mentioned, right, underneath the Rhineland mystics and other things, right, has a possible, I'm not equating the two, but Gnosticism has a possible version of it that is deeply anti-Semitic. But more importantly, right, you have a connection back to Luther. Why would Luther say that? Well, Luther would say that because the Jews, in Luther's mind, are followers of the law, and people, and remember, Luther has an interpretation following Augustine and Paul and his own exacerbation of it, right? People who follow the law are people who are trying to earn their salvation. The point of the law is to reveal to you that you're completely incapable of earning your salvation. And so the Jews who reject Jesus reject faith and salvation in terms of the law. So the Jews are evil. It's interesting that the two great people, the people who are considered to have created modern German style, are Luther and Nietzsche. What does Nietzsche do? Does he give up all of this? No, he takes it and he tries to invert it. He keeps the notion of will. He keeps the fact that it's deeper than rational. He keeps that it's framing the world, filtering. He keeps all of that, but he rejects a lot of the Kantian stuff. He rejects the Platonic stuff. He famously says, I hate Socrates. He's so close to me, I'm always fighting him. He's got this deep conflict with the axial revolution. Why? Because he comes up with this way of responding to the nihilism of Schopenhauer with the will to power. It shares some features with somebody we'll talk about later, another important Cartesian thinker we're going to come back to, Spinoza, the notion of conatus. So the idea here is that everything has a will to live. Here for Nietzsche, everything has a will to power. Everything is pressing itself out. And the thing about Nietzsche is he thinks that this is not just a feature of our minds, this is a feature of reality itself. That when we're, so Schopenhauer, the idea is when we're in touch with the will to live, we're actually in touch with, that driving force. Because again, the most irrational part of us is the part that's in touch with reality. And you get this will to power, this irrational filtering, framing thing. But whereas here, it's pessimistic because it's wearying and it's relentless and meaningless. Here, Nietzsche says, no, turn it around, stop being, and this is going to be his point, stop being so Christian. Stop thinking about all that negation as what's right. This will to power, this pre-Christian desire to extend and create and master oneself in the world. That's what we need, because Nietzsche sees in it something, and there's a deep insight here. And if we're going to criticize Nietzsche and the postmodernists, I don't understand people who advocate for Nietzsche and criticize postmodernism. You've got to spend more time getting that working out together, right? But Nietzsche sees something here. He sees a way of getting back something that was lost in this whole history. How can we get self-transcendence? Because Nietzsche tries to understand the will to power as exactly that desire from the axial revolution to transcend oneself, to go above oneself, to create beyond oneself. And his father's a Lutheran pastor. So he understands Christianity in a totally Lutheran way, that Christianity is about suppressing this capacity for self-transcendence. It's an unfair reading of Christianity. It certainly doesn't capture Neoplatonic Christianity. Nietzsche he's deeply influenced by the Stoics and a lot of axial age thinkers, and he's trying to bring it back, but he's blocked in some important ways by this Lutheran interpretation of Christianity. So Nietzsche says Christianity repressed this, and that is why we suffer. But if we remove the Christian condemnation of this, then the pessimistic, world-wearying will to live becomes the active, creative act of self-transcendence, and we can get back the meaning that was lost in the meaning crisis. But that's a very dangerous way to start thinking in a lot of ways. Because here's my deepest critique of Nietzsche. And it's really hard to critique Nietzsche because he doesn't have a single voice. He has many voices, and they undermine and criticize each other. It's maddening. And that's why if anybody says they have sort of a single interpretation of Nietzsche, you have to really be careful and cautious about it. Because reading Nietzsche is like reading the Bible, purposefully. He purposely modeled himself. He wrote also Sprach Zarathustra to try and replace the Bible, because he understood the role of myth and imagery and symbol, because he's still influenced by the Romantics. But here's my criticism. See, Nietzsche gets this. He understands how self-deceptive we are. He constantly is criticizing human beings for being self-deceptive. But he can't do anything about it. He can't do anything about it because he has reduced In his mind, reason has gone through this Kantian thing and this Cartesian thing, and reason is this logical framing thing. He's lost something. Because the problem for Nietzsche is you have self-transcendence without the machinery of dealing with self-deception. Because what's the machinery for dealing with self-deception from the Platonic tradition that Nietzsche rejects? That's what rationality really is. Rationality is ultimately about the set of psychotechnology that affords self-transcendence by training you skillfully to overcoming self-deception. And because, although he is so aware of self-deception because of this heritage, and because he is so attracted to self-transcendence, there's a tragedy in Nietzsche, which is why I believe he was attracted to tragedy, because although he wants self-transcendence, he cannot provide us with the machinery of overcoming self-deception, other than endless critique, endless satire, endlessly undermining himself. He is honest, but he's not capable of the rationality that is actually the core of addressing self-deception, and therefore he has a one-sided model of self-transcendence enmeshed in a will to power, and that is going to be a very dangerous thing. And we're going to take a look more at that when we take a look at more pseudo-religious ideologies and how they drench the world in post-Napoleonic blood next time. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Ruff, 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 ruff. Oh my God. Friggin', is your mind blown?
A little bit.
Yeah. My mind's pretty blown.
Spiritual candy
Yes,
ideologies.
spiritual candy.
Or spiritual junk food, but I like spiritual candy.
I smell sex and candy.
But tasty, but not nutritious. And that's ideologies in a nutshell. They're
That
tasty.
is it, man.
They're sweet.
Spiritual
They're
junk food.
alluring, but there's no we'll call it nutrition, but wisdom. There's no transcendent understanding. There's
Yeah.
no
It's
no nothing.
glitzy
It's
and
just-
it's pretty and all of that, but it's not actually healthy. It's not actually really doing anything for you.
yeah.
So we have the French Revolution and Napoleon and the Romantics influence
And the romantics
interpretation
attraction
of that
to
attraction
Napoleon.
to Napoleon.
So why would they be? And well,
because they're celebrating this guy's capacity
his
for
force of will.
is
a way to
impressing his will on the world
Yes.
and taking his imagination and shaping the world into its image.
Yeah.
You know what he wants to see. So they get attracted to this guy. But you know he definitely drenched the world in blood and was going way far beyond boundaries and imperial conquest. Anyways, so Napoleon's defeated. Science moves on. Romanticism has failed as a replacement for Christianity and religion in
And
general.
failed horribly.
Failed horribly.
Horribly.
Yeah. We go on living in decadent romanticism as we do today.
And the word decadent doesn't mean like sweet or something like that. It means prone to decay.
Yeah.
So when we refer to like a decadent dessert, it's something that will rot quickly, that you must consume quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Or
It's gonna rot your teeth too.
Or a decadent lifestyle is something that's ultimately going to decay.
Yes.
So this word,
overly materialistic,
Yeah.
overly selfish.
so
kind of way
decadent
of living.
romanticism is bound to decay. It's
Yeah.
bound to consume itself and die.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that with our modern counterparts of this romantic idea as well. You know, we say the what's the phrase? The left eats itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this idea is like, so on the left you've got a bunch of different groups that all think that they're right, and at first it works really well, but then nobody within the group can be perfect, so then it just starts eating itself.
Starts turning on
It
itself.
starts turning on itself and consuming itself. And it's not just the left, but that's the saying currently that you may have heard. But
Well, that's an old one, and it's an understanding that comes from what happened during Marxism.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could say that, this romantic ideology it suffers from not being able to reproduce itself. Like a good culture and civilization or economic principle will, if it's good, will readily reproduce itself in the next generation, and the next generation, and the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
A bad idea, a bad ideology has to be forced on people each time, because it doesn't naturally just like this idea of semi-free market capitalism, where I can work hard, have my kids, have my house, and then my kids can grow up, work hard, and have their kids and have their house. That works. What doesn't work is, making everybody this exactly the same, and like centralizing everything, because the people who are in that system don't want to pass it on to their kids. The kids are going to rebel against it.
The people that are lazy and totally unproductive are actually reaping the benefits. The people that are more productive, the people that are more productive don't get anything for being more productive and doing the work that keeps everyone else alive.
So therefore it doesn't reproduce itself. There's a term for it that I can't remember. I'm not going to try to.
It sounds pretty self-defeating though.
But so after this, what happened after this failure, this decadent romanticism, this trying to replace Christianity, well, the nihilism came, and we were introduced to Schopenhauer, the godfather of nihilism, who internalized the Occam Lutheran worldview.
Yep, and picks up on where Kant left off basically, and he comes up with this idea that. And he comes up with a flip on what Kant believed. He thinks the rationality, the imagination, rather than it being an act of will and so forth, arbitrary. Okay, we come up with the idea of it being an arbitrary will. It's the will to live that's driving us. That's what's driving
irrational will to live.
It's a rational will to live. This is what filters and frames reality to make it sensible for our little machine ego. So basically it's in service of the will to live. The rationality is
so like
the will
you said,
to live, and the little machine ego is in service of that will to live.
Yeah, will is the giant that the ego, the little man, sits upon his shoulder.
Yeah, so there's no meaning or fulfillment in this worldview either. It's relentless, it's pointless, it's not even rational. Dawkins, I love how he points out Dawkins, this is how we still see the world today for a lot of people. Dawkins thinks that we're just a bunch of replicator machines for our selfish genes. Yeah. And that's a very one-sided way of looking at the human being. But he's he's stuck in that side of things.
That quote by Schopenhauer, sex is the cruel joke that the species plays on the individual. So you think you're doing it because you like it and you want this connection with people, but really it's just your genetics, your special genetics hijacking you to get its ends, which is replication.
Yeah. Yes, that's like boiling it down, and then I think you're missing some ingredients when you make that assumption.
Yeah. And well, ultimately,
but it's witty and it's clever and it seems true because there's truth in there. Well, it's just truth that's compartmentalized off of other additional truth that you can add there to make that a more holistic model.
You could say the purpose of life is to continue living and to continue making more life accurately enough. Like that's kind of what life does. Life replicates itself, but not only that, it doesn't take into account the immeasurable, the quality of life that life is going for, because life doesn't just keep recreating the same thing. It recreates something that's better, more efficient.
And why does life want to live? Just because it feels good to be alive, or is it because there's this thing called love, this strange ineffable thing called love?
Maybe all life is evolving
exists through species
to create an organism that then can embody a soul. I don't know.
No. Maybe God's turning back into himself through this whole process. And
so this replicator machine idea really leaves us with a meaningless existence that is just an irrational will to live, that and this idea frames all of our perceptions of the world at this point, as we're if we were to be a nihilist. So basically this is reality, and then you die.
It just furthers the notion of meaningless existence.
And the goal of the nihilist would be to quiet that.
You can quiet that will to live for some transient moments of escape from the burden of being alive. And so now we get into escapism.
Yeah.
nihilism,
Yeah.
extreme self-interest and selfishness, and all of this stuff starts, and greed and things like that start to become even more prevalent.
Yeah. And, romanticism and nihilism are tied at the hip.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that, it's just this one only single moment that really is anything. And then, well, if you can strive to quiet your baser replicator tendencies, then maybe you can have that one moment and find the peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we're introduced to Nietzsche.
I think a lot of wisdom schools reinterpreted themselves at this point, and they started to see that, like, okay, well, we can at least find some peace in the moment.
Sure.
And
there is something to be said about, quieting,
certainly there is,
quieting the mind and quieting your baser, we'll call them id desires, if you will.
But there's a joy and a bliss when you go deeper and deeper and deeper into that presence, into that moment. You find that it's not just a meaningless emptiness that, okay, is at least an escape. It's not. It's direct contact with the immediate moment of reality, and it's depthless. And there's deep wonder and communion that can occur the deeper you go into that moment. Yeah. So that there's jumping over something immeasurably deep here. So nihilism and romanticism, we can see now, are deeply intertwined and closely related. Nihilism stems from romanticism.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, and in comes Nietzsche, the godfather of postmodernism. And I didn't quite write this right, but I think it's close enough. The point of law is to show you that you cannot, you can't do anything for yourself. You need a law. You can't make judgments for yourself. You need this law, which, is understandable, knowing about his dad, who, was a Lutheran preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so his view of Christianity is very much this oppressive Christianity. So Nietzsche's idea was not the will to live, but the will to power.
Yeah. He doesn't have a notion of Christianity he doesn't have the Neoplatonic notion of Christianity, which is wholly different than the Lutheran version of Christianity. His father's a Lutheran pastor, and Nietzsche's, he keeps the will, but he rejects. What does he reject here? My notes leave off at everyone. We know he takes the will to power and recognizes, he says, okay, so there's this will to power, and this is the future. This is a future of reality that we must
rejects
create.
The condemnation of the Lutheran interpretation,
yes. But he rejects Christianity's path because he only has the Lutheran understanding of it. That's right.
that repressive, oppressive.
That's right.
And his idea is...
So of course he rejects that. That's worth rejecting.
The will to power is what gets you in touch with meaning and reality, not the will to live and not just this arbitrary... proposition that
falls into this idea of the will to power.
Yeah,
wow.
Which
it's a double-edged sword there, big time.
There is something to be said though about this idea of being powerful in the sense that you can really
be a productive creator and master yourself.
Imprint your mark on reality.
On the reality, yes. And master yourself in a good, productive way.
And you take it too far, then you get super despotic leaders that just are worried about power. But in the more innocent sense would be somebody who would create or design a wonderful invention that has his name on it, or climb to the top of the mountain and name it after themselves, or something like that. That's the more benign end of that will to power.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So there's the horrible end of it, which is I'm going to enforce my will to power on everybody, and they're going to remember me because I forced it on them. And then there's the ones that's like, well, I want to be remembered for my will to power would be to create this, say, a device that revolutionizes the world, and everybody will remember, like Edison, like the Tesla. Inventors, and Tesla was just more like God was hitting him with lightning bolts in my head, and he had it in his head, and he had to tell his dad, it's like, look, I don't want to be a religious priest or something like that. Like I'll get he was very sickly, and he promised his dad, if you let me go to school for science instead of religion, I'll get better, I promise. And he got better, and he just wanted to do things and make things and come to an understanding, because he used to get these terrible blasts of just information and other things just all at once. It just slammed him, and really hurt. And he was a very sickly kid too, so and absolutely brilliant. Wasn't the most, he didn't want people to be like, oh, Tesla made this. He just wanted to make something that worked better than everybody else's because he's like, what you're doing is not very efficient.
That's not the best way of doing it. He just wanted to make the best ends.
And he got screwed over by a lot of different people because he wasn't a will to power guy. He was more of a trying to figure out how the material universe works. And, I would say he's probably a little bit spiritual.
He's trying to be pragmatic too.
Yeah.
He's trying to do what works, and he cared. I think there's a spiritual element there, is that he cared.
And he
he
believed electricity was alive and was very much alive and warned us about this. So there was something more than just, but
he definitely tapped into that Neoplatonic living universe idea.
But he used his will to overcome a lot of things, and like even to the point where he like wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, and do things. He just
So will can be good.
It can, but
there is this idea of the will to power that can really be taken to dangerous extremes by dark.
Well, because power doesn't get you in touch with reality. You may be able to affect reality very well with it, but it doesn't get you in any more contact with reality. That's the wisdom end of things.
Yeah, Nietzsche thought that if we could block our will to live and then use that power for self-transcendence, then we'll be good. And so he's trying to take this opposite approach of what Buddha took with asceticism almost. It's like he's trying to lean in to the having mode. Mm-hmm. Instead of the being mode.
Yeah.
Now, the asceticism was the denial of being mode itself too. So it's the wrong way. But either you're giving in to too much or you're denying too much. But so we're going into magnification of having mode, power oriented ways of achieving.
Yeah, you have power. You don't be power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the criticism of Nietzsche is he couldn't do anything between the divide or about the divide between reasoning and transcendence.
That's it. All he could do was critique himself.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
Which led to this postmodernist idea of negative thinking and just critiquing things. Like if you just talk about how bad something is over and over and over and over again, then you'll magically come to some understanding.
Yeah. And Nietzsche was honest, and he was well-meaning, and he was incredibly genius.
Yeah.
But he was actually ultimately incapable of solving this by himself, and he tried. I mean, he tried like crazy, but he ultimately he left us with a lot of useful thoughts and considerations, though. He definitely left us some building blocks for something.
But like any great thinker, we do cast our shadows on things, so. And he fooled himself by mashing this idea of transcendence and will to power together, because will to power, you could have a very powerful leader that hasn't transcended up through the baser instincts of the human animal at all.
Yeah, true.
Just because you're powerful doesn't mean you're godly or wise. We've learned this with despotic kings before this. It's like just because they're king doesn't mean that they're any wiser.
Yeah, they might just be really good at manipulating.
Or they were just
people, and power,
or there's people behind them that are making the real decisions, and you're just sitting there with a hand up your butt, just going.
We've had that a lot too in history.
Yeah.
That's where the whole story of the Wizard of Oz comes from, or at least partially. The Wizard of Oz is about a lot more than just that. Wizard of Oz is deep. Speaking of, and now there's something that we missed. I wanted to cover real fast, and I'm trying to figure out where it was. Was it Wagner?
Wagner. Oh yeah, the anti-Semitism.
The anti-Semitism. He takes Romanticism, and does some interesting things, like with music. Like he breaks from the home key, but he also happens to be an anti-Semite. And what was it? Him? That or was Schopenhauer, or who was it that went with this notion of the people who follow law are trying to earn salvation, and since Jews reject Jesus, they're not following the law. They don't respect the law, so they must be evil, kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is where that idea starts to come about. It's also a product of Romanticism.
I'm going to pull up this quote here.
It's a disturbing concept, and this is where the Germans then twisted Nietzsche, who did not mean anything about racial superiority. But he did believe in man mastering himself and creating a better version of himself. So they took his notion of a Superman and they twisted it for their own.
The Übermensch.
The Übermensch for their own ideological ends.
Yeah. So Luther, this is a quote from Luther in his Luther anti-Semitically states that we are at fault in not slaying them, the Jews, The treaties also argue for burning their books, synagogues, and homes and drafting them into forced labor or exiling them.
God. And who was it that said that?
That was Luther.
That was Luther. That was Luther.
That
yeah.
was
Okay,
Luther.
I thought
Yeah,
it
you
was.
mentioned that
That's
before
one
the
of
show.
yeah.
When we were talking
Yeah.
about Luther.
I thought it was Luther, and then I was like, was it Luther? Because he doesn't talk about Luther much at all in this episode, but sure enough, yeah, he does bring Luther back up
Yeah,
at
so,
that point for that reason. Yeah, so this is the legacy of Luther.
Yeah. So,
You know, it is what it is.
yeah, and it's like I'm not surprised that somebody that took the concept of, Christ and agapic love and passing it through and really took the Paul approach of law and order and you're a sinner that needs Jesus to die for your sins. I'm not surprised he went to the route of saying, oh, yeah, the Jews are the enemy. They worship the old God. They don't worship our laws. In fact, they killed, our Savior and all this stuff. Like, yeah, I could see how if, Luther was, before nihilism was a thing, was pretty damn nihilistic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
of
well,
course,
he's living
when
in
you're
a very dark time. So, yeah, this is the beginning of wide-scale nihilism.
Who are you going to
the human
blame when
population.
your entire mental construct is about blaming things? This is that the perverted Gnostic idea of the demagogue running a prison facility. That's what Luther was in. And who are the prison guards? But the Jews. Because they are the worshipers of the old God that held us in captivity and squashed us down. Because, there was this illusion that, the old God, the wrathful God, was the Old Testament, the God of the Jews. And now there's this new God of light that is above that old God that we must...
This is why religion in the traditional sense that we practiced it in the recent history that we can remember is like, this is the version of God that's real and yours is wrong and we're going to kill you because yours is wrong is the stupidest, most dangerous thing.
Psychological and ideological certainty is very dangerous.
There's other, I don't think that's true to Christ's way. I don't think that you're being a true Christian if you're thinking that this is how you need to operate.
Wasn't Jesus a Jew?
You're going to argue with other Christians even over which
Jesus
version
was
of
a Jew.
Christianity is right.
I think somebody should have told Luther that.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, wasn't Jesus a Jew? And, he believed in God and, his dad was a Jew and his mom was a Jew and all of his friends were Jews. I'm sure he had some Roman friends too at a period of time.
But he was a revolutionary one and he
all of his followers were Jews.
A way that was like an addendum to Judaism. That
it's the next logical step that you would go within the teachings of Judaism. And, it's like, okay, well, and it's about love. It's about making.
But the Jews were never evil. There was just evil human beings that happened to be Jewish, just like there's evil human beings that happen to be Russian, American, Buddhist, sometimes even. Like there's literally, it's happened. It has happened across whatever kind of tribe you can name. There have been evil humans.
Well, and there can also be very not evil people that have done some very heinous things as well. That's the thing. And also very heinous, evil people that have done very good things. Yeah. It's not just this black and white, and it's not even the shades of gray. It's a menagerie of all types of contrast.
Yep.
And
that's where we get the shades of gray from, basically. Yeah. There's a lot of different factors that you've got light and dark factors.
But there's even color and hue in there too. So it's like,
that was Solzhenitsyn's realization, was that that evil, the line of evil runs through every man, runs through every human. It's not this ideology or that ideology that is itself evil. It's not capitalism or socialism or this or that. It's human beings that are evil. Now, some isms can be certainly more dangerous and nefarious than others.
Well, I think probably what you could consider as the most evil is the thing that lies to you with shiny candy and fattens you up and makes you lethargic and not thinking, and then uses you for terrible things. That's evil.
Yeah. All these different systems are just tools for managing humans. Are they trying to manage them in a benevolent fashion that helps increase our cooperation and symbiotic nature and peace, drives us more towards peace? Or is it something that...
Or is it just the will to power and control?
Is it just the will to power to control us?
Even if it is trying to, say, better people's lives, because this, idea of socialism in all forms, whether it's, communism, fascism, or national socialism that we've seen, there were people attempting to do good by humans, but the proof of the pudding is in the tasting.
Yes.
We see
we
after
find
the
that
fact
the
that it's like,
system
nope,
is actually
that's-
inherently
yep,
destructive.
Very
It's
destructive.
designed to destroy.
Let's leave evil out
Yeah.
of it. It's
It doesn't-
destructive and
yeah.
counterproductive for what
Say
humans
that, yeah.
are really trying
And
to
then
do.
put that thing in the hands of someone that has evil tendencies, and you're in big trouble. Or even just selfish tendencies,
And also put
is any human.
put it in the hands of people who are Gnostics and philosophers and thinkers, and all the imaginative ways of horribleness that they can.
Yeah, and
Put
we
out
mean
on
like
the
dark
world.
Gnostics, yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there would be light Gnostics as well.
Well,
you could say.
like Marx was, a Gnostic as well, and actually what he preached as far as like the proletariat and the awakened masses, that awakening is a Gnostic awakening. A certain type of
proletarian's
knowing.
awakening, yeah.
Is a type of knowing, knowing the oppressed.
Yeah.
The gnosis
Yeah, many
of
of
the
the
oppressed,
truths that Marx points out are, in fact, his interpretations of what they mean and how to solve them.
Yeah. And mind
Ultimately,
you,
were what caused hundreds of millions of people to mercilessly turn on one
And I
another,
won't
kill
ca-
each
I
other
won't-
in mass genocide
Yeah.
and starvation, and the most horrifying things you can possibly imagine human beings ever having done.
and I
It
won't
just-
call him an idiot, but he wasn't as smart as people think, and like a lot of his ideas were really flawed. And like Engels had a lot to do with making him sound smarter than he actually was. And
It was so bad.
oh, and you know who else hated the Jews? Marx.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
he didn't like the blacks or the Portuguese or anybody else either.
Yeah, there's your Marxism for you. Yeah.
Yeah,
No better than Hitler's idea.
No, actually, Hitler hated Marx because Hitler thought that Marx was this secret capitalist Jew that was trying to control people through communism, and
Look at that.
Hitler's socialism was the only right way, and it was only looking after
Rationality.
Germans,
The extreme.
and not just any Germans, but racially pure Germans, and that's why it's National Socialism. It's a racial nation.
Gross.
So Hitler's Nazism was socialism and racism. It's
Yeah.
a racist socialism, whereas
Yeah.
communism doesn't necessarily care about your race. They just want you to comply,
Yeah, yeah.
unless they can use your race, because Marx did speak on this. He's like, like the African populations and the brown populations could be used in the same way as the farming the proletariat, the poor people.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and you see a lot of this now with the super racialized everything
Yep.
and oppressor
The
versus
cultural
oppressed thing.
Marxism is used as a weapon to destroy systems of self-governance like ours.
Yeah, sure. Because you can't get people to do.
So good at it.
You can't get people to have a revolution if they're comfy and love each other and they have enough to eat.
No, you got to turn them against each other.
Yeah, you got to
find their weak
starve
points
them
and
out a
turn
little
against
bit,
each other.
whether it's physically or spiritually or mentally. Just.
Yep.
But I have a feeling, because we're going to talk about Hegel next week, but as we go on, it's going to get realer and deeper, and don't
And
get
hit closer and closer to home, guys.
Yeah, and don't get depressed. It's easy to get
why I've
depressed.
been wanting to share this with you all for a while here. Yeah.
And it has taken 20 some episodes to this point just to prime our brain to be able to see
How we can actually solve this problem of postmodernism
and see what the problem
and-
actually
yeah,
is.
and really understand how we got here. Yeah. Like detectives going through something and just understanding the actual facts so that we can best solve the case. So that's where we're at. And that was a big one. That was a really big one. But thank you guys so much for joining us on this and for helping this podcast grow. I can't believe that the podcast, the audio side of this whole experiment here, has gotten to over 100,000 views. Could not have done it without all of you out there. And so I thank you all so much. If you're on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe and share with your friends and fam who you think may be interested in this as well, because we want to grow the YouTube side of things now and reach ever more people. I also highly recommend, guys, check out Russell Brand's conversation with Cornel West that he had in the last couple days. You should be able to find it pretty easily on his YouTube or his Rumble page. It's on Earth's Awakening news page on Facebook right now. And look forward to upcoming shows with American Dharma Band. On the 31st of this month, we got a show at Granny's in Winchester, Virginia. On the 7th, we're going to be in Baltimore, Maryland at Zen West. And we got tickets for that one. We're going to be headlining that show. And we'd love to have as many of you guys come out as possible to help us really put on a great event there. And then we're going to have, quite possibly, I think that we might just take this show on April 15th. It's going to be several shows in a row for us, but Why not? A month of shows, one a week.
April 15th
April
at
14th. I think it's 14th at
Seven Moons.
Seven Moons. It's going to be a Sun and Moon Festival at Seven Moons in Hedgesville, West Virginia. So I need to get back with Mr. Michael Maverick of Cannon Hill Band about that, who's organizing the event, and Kim
so
as well.
he's the guy we can yell at whenever we find any tiny little thing wrong, and we can mess with him.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
Mav, I'm coming for you.
Yeah, Mav's a great guy. He's
Yeah.
hilarious. So he'll take it all in stride.
Yeah, he's got a nice tough skin. He can
Yeah.
handle the throwing of the shade.
Yep, indeed. And so yeah, we got that, and then what was the next one? It's the 22nd of April. We're going to be at Blue Fox in Winchester, and so we got 4 shows in a row
And
coming
hey,
up. for you
Brandon,
guys.
if you're listening, it was Blue Fox on that date. My saxophone player friend from a group I play with, he was asking me, he's like, playing at the Blue Fox at some point in time?
Winchester, and I'm almost positive it's the 22nd. I'm glad my brain is starting to work and memorizing stuff again.
Oh boy, I wish
I highly recommend Lion's Mane Mushroom.
My brain has never worked for remembering places, dates, or names. So
Yeah, if I repeat it enough times, it starts to seal itself in there. And sure enough, yeah, April 22nd, we're going to be playing at Blue Fox with Tube Freaks, and I'm not sure if 0 Hour is still on that bill or not.
the race should
Yeah, guys, we'd love for you guys to come out if you're in the area. So we're going all up and down the 81 corridor here with these shows. We're going to be in Virginia. We're going to be in Maryland on these events now. But we get up into Pennsylvania and, of course, West Virginia as well.
Yeah.
So we're out there. Check out American Dharma Band. That's our band. You can like and subscribe. We're on YouTube as well. And we got all of our music. And you can check the links in actually this video that you're watching right now on YouTube or wherever you're listening. You can see links to listen to our music. We'd highly recommend, or we highly appreciate you guys checking that out. And I recommend always for you guys to, if you enjoy this series, to check out John Vervaeke's channel on YouTube as well and follow the work. He's doing another series that's following up on Awakening from the Meaning Crisis right now, which is called After Socrates. And it's all about helping us actually develop our wisdom again in this world. So that's lots happening. So we're not just awakening from the meaning crisis. We're working at solving it here together, guys. And it's going to take as many of us together as we can possibly get to be able to pull it off. But, this is what we humans do. We like a good adventure, and we sure do love surfing tidal waves and skirting at the very edge of what's possible. And we're at it.
We don't deal with boredom well. Let's just put it that way.
No. We do know how to party and have a good time.
Yeah, and make bad times when times are too good. Yeah, so.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're good at messing things up when we get too comfortable too.
Yeah. Rat Utopia experiment comes to mind.
Yeah, right. No, we'll always be ready for the next asteroid if we keep it out the way we are. That's for sure. We'll be learning then unlearning then learning.
We'll either be able to stop the asteroid, or we'll be in such a terrible shape that we'll just be standing going, bring it on!
Thank you. Yes, finally. Yeah,
finally.
Let's hope it doesn't get to that.
Yeah,
point.
no.
I really would. Even if there's an asteroid or it's a nuclear holocaust, whatever it is, like I like the idea of the fact that we're recognizing now that we do have the potential to come together, even in this day and age, where we see ourselves as so separate, because we've done this over and over and over again. And in fact, the majority of people in the world are reasonable, good, loving, kind people that just want to figure out a way to compromise with one another and solve things together. And the people that are on the extremes that are just othering whole other groups of people and demonizing and making mass enemies and oversimplifying and stereotyping things, they're the minority, and we don't have to let them become more popular. We can outmode them.
No, it should be our goal to convert them into just being, like
we can invite them.
Wholesome creatures.
Yeah. We can create the new system that make the existing obsolete. We make the existing systems obsolete by making something that's so attractive and obviously works better that everyone just drops the old thing and moves to the new
it's
thing.
like, this way's way cooler than what you're doing. Let's just go over to this.
This works better. Yeah. And so rather than a violent revolution, you can actually have a sort of awakening kind of revolution like that.
Well, all violence originally begins within oneself and how it sees the rest of the universe. And then
if we can learn to solve it within ourselves, we're making the world that much lighter, because every single interaction we have is going to be a little bit brighter, a little bit calmer, a little bit more peaceful. That's going to impress upon other people, and it's going to spread out. And this is how we do it. So Yeah, I feel the yawns coming on too.
Oh yeah, pumpkin mode. This was a long one too, but good.
It was, but it was a great one.
11/11, make a wish.
Hey, love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.